Miss Era was the only daughter of the most prestigious house of Duke Godwin in the entire empire, and according to the oracle's will, she was destined to marry the crown prince. This was her fate from birth. As the years went by, the girl grew more beautiful and noble, and her beauty captured the hearts of many. On the day of her grand wedding to the crown prince, all the subjects of the empire were envious of her, and an atmosphere of joy filled the air. The other noble ladies all said they were a beautiful couple, a match made in heaven for all to see. Everyone was convinced that His Highness the Crown Prince must be head over heels in love with the girl, but that was not the case. No one could have predicted what would happen next. While everyone was dreaming of a happy and prosperous married life for the young couple, the crown prince said something on their wedding night that Era found unbelievable, and her rose-colored world would fall apart. He bluntly asked the young lady to annul the marriage. This shocked everyone. Albert also went to his parents and told them he wanted to end his marriage with Era. The father reminded his son that the royal family only marries the one chosen by the oracle, a rule that had always been sacred and inviolable. The crown prince had spent the wedding night with her and should have felt something, but nothing happened. It was said that the descendants of the god Zeus could not develop feelings of love for ordinary women, with the sole exception of the one chosen by the oracle. Albert had thought Miss Godwin would change him, unlocking some kind of wonderful early love bliss, but this did not happen. You see, the crown prince had never felt desire for any woman before. His heart had always been cold and empty. He had been waiting for the appearance of the golden mark, which would only appear on the one chosen by the oracle, symbolizing their union. He gently approached the blonde girl, but the moment did not bring the emotions he had hoped for. After a brief kiss, the crown prince pulled away from Era, his eyes filled with doubt and confusion. The heroine noticed the man staring intently at her at that moment, and she saw the confusion in his eyes. It was clear that the mark had still not appeared on the lady's back, and she felt lost and alone. The crown prince said it was terrible, that he felt nothing for Miss Era, not at all. He took a step back, and the girl's heart clenched with fear, feeling extremely anxious about her future. Albert's parents were stunned by their son's words. They had no idea how to handle the situation. The crown prince claimed that Miss Era was no different from other women, but this was not true at all. By the way, the empress was completely stunned, saying it was impossible and that she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Albert asked Miss Era if she was truly the one chosen by the oracle, but his voice remained calm. This was the first time in the empire's history that the one chosen by the oracle had failed in the union ceremony. Who would have thought that Miss Era was not the oracle's chosen one, and that her fate would be so tragic? There were rumors that they had found a new chosen one in a collateral branch of the Godwin family, which was big news. Now, no one could say for sure what would happen to Miss Era and how she would navigate this cruel twist of fate. People said that marrying the crown prince's ex-fiancée was a great shame, a huge disgrace. No one wanted a woman who knew nothing about her own feelings and life's purpose. Now, the woman who was once mocked by the entire empire was being called an imposter, which was so unfair. That night, our heroine couldn't sleep, her mind filled with worry and despair about everything. Era desperately wished someone could help her and listen to her heartbreaking troubles. And so, a year passed, and Miss Era's life changed dramatically. Every night, the woman began to frequent the twins' veil, a place where no one knew her and no one expected her. What Miss Godwin was doing in such a wretched place that made her feel so lonely was a complete mystery. People mocked Era, thinking she was desperate to find a husband, but that wasn't the truth at all. Our girl slammed her glass on the table, thinking that everyone just spoke empty words. If it weren't for all this, the girl wouldn't be here at all, but her heart was consumed by doubt and worry. Era knew she had to find someone who could understand her, and she had to find them soon. Suddenly, her mask fell off, and she felt exposed and at a loss. Everyone present immediately stared at the imposter, who could no longer hide her feelings. The crowd realized that Miss Godwin was at the twins' veil, but the biggest question was why. The heroine was annoyed that her identity had been revealed and didn't know what to do next. Era pushed these thoughts aside. She could no longer hide from everyone, or even from herself. If she could just get some sleep, things would be different, but this night was so long. Suddenly, the girl felt that intense headache return, tearing her apart from the inside. She started to fall, but a pair of strong arms caught her just in time, and she jumped in surprise. A dark-haired stranger with golden eyes asked if the lady was all right, his voice as smooth as silk. The heroine looked at the man in surprise, because her headache vanished in an instant. Era gave a slight smile and asked if he could help her, as she felt very lonely. The stranger told his men not to wait, because he wanted to help the mysterious lady. The heroine admitted she felt a little embarrassed, but she was also completely drawn to him. The two of them walked towards the girl's residence, the air filled with a sense of mystery and anticipation. The stranger was surprised that there was no one around, only the sound of their quiet heartbeats filling the silent night. The heroine wrapped her arms around his neck and asked him to stay with her, her voice firm yet gentle. Era asked him to stay the night, as she couldn't sleep. She was seeking some comfort and explained that she had been suffering from insomnia and a restless soul lately. The man was completely stunned when the lady unexpectedly pushed him onto the bed, as the move was both sudden and bold. She straddled him and gave him a seductive look, his eyes filled with curiosity. The man suggested she see a doctor if she was having trouble sleeping, sounding genuinely concerned. Era smiled and told him that she was already receiving treatment and hoped to be free of the problem soon. The man flinched when her hand landed on his chest, completely caught off guard and feeling a tingling sensation. He stammered that he didn't know what she was talking about, his voice trembling slightly. She leaned in very close, and the man's face instantly flushed red with embarrassment. That innocent little move brought a triumphant smile to her face. With him, she felt confident and desired. Then Era dropped the bombshell. Handsome men were her medicine, because they could heal all the wounds of her soul. She had never seen such an adorable expression on a man's face, and she couldn't tear her eyes away. The man's physique was also amazing, so this medicine was definitely the real deal. When she kissed him, his eyes widened, and he froze, completely caught off guard. She pulled back slightly and felt his heart racing. The man was clearly enjoying the kiss. He was breathing heavily, as he hadn't expected things to move so fast. Between them, Era also felt a strange sensation, as if the whole world was spinning. After the kiss, her headache was gone, and she felt lighter than ever, as if floating on air. Suddenly, a golden oracle mark lit up on her back, which was incredibly strange. Era felt a wave of calm wash over her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, and it gave her hope. Her eyelids began to droop with exhaustion, unable to resist the wave of sleepiness. Then she collapsed onto his chest, and he held her tightly, as if protecting her from all harm. The heroine finally woke up when the sun was already high in the sky, warming her face. For the first time in a long time, Era felt so good, as if all her worries had vanished. She was surprised that she didn't have a hangover, considering how much she had drunk last night. Then Era thought that the reason she felt so good now might have something to do with the golden-eyed man. Everything felt different. After meeting him, she felt full of life and energy. The heroine decided that she had to find out who that handsome, mysterious man was. At that very moment, the stranger was already training with his sword, his movements graceful and firm. His comrades caused a stir when they found out their commander had been taken to the Twins Vale last night. That place was the hottest club for young nobles, attracting all the tourists in the city. The commander had been fighting monsters to survive since he was a child, so he never had time for women. But the knights thought their commander deserved a personal life and a chance at happiness, love and all that. Before long, word spread through the troops that a lady had thrown herself at the commander and that he had even walked her home. One knight even speculated that they might have fallen in love on the way, which would be a good thing for both of them. The handsome man with golden eyes walked up to his men and told them they were talking complete nonsense. The knight asked if the commander had a good time with the girl last night, and wasn't he happy to be alone with her? The man recalled everything that happened on that strange night, and now he couldn't get it out of his mind. His face flushed red at the thought of the strange woman's boldness. He was completely bewildered by such a move, and she had just fallen asleep right on his chest like that. It was unexpected, but it also felt quite nice. The commander looked at her and realized how beautiful she was. Her gentleness captured his heart instantly. He wondered if all women were as soft and pleasant as this mysterious stranger with golden eyes. Whenever monsters attacked a village, there would be orphans, and the situation was very cruel. The golden-eyed man was one of them, and no one knew his background. He took up arms before he came of age and grew up amidst blood and smoke. The only women he had ever felt anything for were those who fought alongside him. When our hero became the commander of the Knights, he hated the guys who skipped training to chase after women. The soldiers all said that relaxing with a woman boosted morale, but he just didn't get it. Our hero was that kind of person, because what was the point of sleeping with a woman? It seemed strange to him. How was it any different from sleeping with another man? When he touched a woman, he felt nothing. This scared him. But now, the Knight Commander didn't understand why his heart was pounding as if he had just run a marathon. The man gently touched the young woman's lips, his hands trembling with nervousness. He felt as if he were cursed, which was very strange for him. The Knight Commander jumped out of bed, trying not to wake the stranger, but it was harder than it looked. Then, the man tucked the girl in, making sure she was warm and comfortable, and that her body wouldn't distract him. The Knight Commander threw on his cloak and hurried away from there, not wanting to attract any attention. The man told his men that nothing had happened between them, but they didn't believe him. Then the commander sharply asked who wanted to step up and fight him right now to prove their strength. One knight pushed the second-in-command forward, saying he didn't want to die in a fight. The commander started shouting for the soldiers to take up their arms and prepare to face the enemy. The second-in-command attacked first, but his opponent easily blocked the attack and claimed victory. The commander believed his body was reacting abnormally because he had been slacking off on his training for too long. He just needed to get back to work, become strong again, and regain his confidence. That's all. The heroine was angry that the stranger had slipped away without a word. Era decided she had to find this man and find out everything about him. She jumped out of bed, silently praying that her sleeping pill wouldn't kick in just yet, so she could figure this out. The heroine fell onto the bed and started writing down every detail she remembered about the man, trying to make sense of it all. She racked her brain all day, but couldn't remember anything, which left her feeling completely lost. The girl realized she absolutely needed to ask his name if she wanted to find out the truth. Era was furious with herself for not being able to remember anything, which frustrated her greatly. She flung open her wardrobe, deciding she had to find the man as soon as possible, or at least find a clue to track him down. From a pile of things, the young woman pulled out the black lace mask she wore to that club. Suddenly, Era's door was thrown open, and a woman stood there, looking very worried. She asked Era in frustration if she had gone to the Twins Vale again, because the whole city was talking about it. The manor's servant reminded Era that her father was already in poor health, so she needed to pull herself together. The woman added that now the girl needed to find a good husband for herself to improve her situation. The servant started to panic when Era smiled and said she wasn't interested in that at all right now. She assured Era that if she found a good match, her father would surely get better over time. 6 months ago, the healer said her father was suffering from a serious mental illness, which put a lot of pressure on Era. If it weren't for the high priest, the man would surely have died, which kept Era on edge. Following the priest's advice, the heroine came to the capital, hoping for the best and wanting to help her father. All Era hoped for was that her father would finally get well and return to a normal life with her. The heroine closed her eyes tightly as a splitting headache hit her, and she struggled to focus on her thoughts and feelings. The maid started to panic when she realized her mistress was sick again and needed immediate help. Everything had been fine this morning, and Era had even slept soundly, which gave her hope for a better day. The heroine's father was still in a coma, but when he woke up, he always asked about his daughter with concern. This was exactly why she had to keep going and live for her father, no matter how tough things got. But this damn headache and insomnia were literally killing her, leaving her feeling exhausted. Unlike her father, Era received no divine help, and she felt isolated in her suffering. The doctor told her that if she didn't start sleeping again, she would die from sleep deprivation and stress within 6 months. Her only medicine was that man, who could help her forget her nightmares, even for a moment. But deep down, Era knew that there was no going back. Regardless, the heroine had to live, and giving up was not an option. Just then, the Knight Commander was honing his swordsmanship on the training grounds. He stopped abruptly when he saw the silhouette of the girl who had been on his mind. The man froze, unsure if it was real or not, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he swung his sword again, trying to focus on his training and block everything else out. The Knight Commander looked down at his right hand, which had started to tremble with excitement and stress. The vision of the stranger began to whisper in his ear, making it impossible for him to concentrate. The Knight Commander covered his ears, realizing he was clearly going crazy thinking about her. He couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful stranger, and her image never left his mind for a moment. Just the thought of the girl was enough to ignite a burning fire of desire in the man's chest. The commander had never been distracted by a woman before, which was incredible. His comrades behind him wondered what he was doing, as he was clearly distracted from his training. The soldiers said they had decided to go for a drink to relax after a long day of drills. They invited the commander to join them at the Twins Vale, where there was always some fun to be had. That was where he had met her, the mysterious stranger who had completely captivated him. The Knight Commander announced that he would go with his comrades, not wanting to be left out. They were all excited because now the boss was paying, not the regular soldiers. The man began to hastily button up his jacket, try to look his best for the encounter. He couldn't understand why he wanted to see the stranger again, as it felt so sudden and strange. The heroine stood in the establishment, looking around and trying to find any clues. She had been wandering around for hours, but couldn't remember a thing about that night. That's when everything changed. Era hadn't slept in 3 days and was exhausted from worry and stress about the future. 3 men with smirks on their faces approached the heroine and started hitting on her. They asked if they could keep the beauty company, to spice up her evening's entertainment. Era scoffed and apologized, saying she was actually looking for a handsome guy to have fun with. One of the guys immediately got angry when he heard her say that, as it clearly bruised his ego. He asked if she still thought she was a princess, and if she really thought anyone cared about her. The man grabbed Era's arm, saying she needed to be taught a lesson for being so arrogant now. The heroine started demanding that he let go of her immediately, and she wasn't going to back down. The man bluntly said that Era was the bastard daughter of a nobody, and yes, that hurt. They started laughing, saying her father was probably just a street prostitute. How vile. Those bullshit words definitely hit her hard, and you could see the anger and fury boiling inside her. That's when she bit the guy's wrist, trying to show him she was not to be messed with. The masked guy immediately lost it and raised his hand to hit Era, and you could see the fury in his eyes. But then another hand grabbed him, stopping him in his tracks, and all eyes turned to the newcomer. The masked guy turned around to see who on earth was interfering and meddling in his business. The Knight Commander just stared coldly at the man, as if he wouldn't tolerate that kind of trashy behavior. The heroine was completely clueless, wondering who this person was and why he was showing up now. The commander asked if she was okay, his calm and steady voice cutting through the chaos. The 2 men locked eyes, each with their own thoughts about the whole situation. The big guy raised his fist and told the stranger to mind his own business. If he wanted to play the hero, he should find another girl who was willing to play his games. The commander froze when he heard that the woman was only looking for a one-night stand, and nothing more. A lot of men wanted to verify if this theory was true and see if it was worth believing. He blurted out that the noble Miss Godwin was fooling around with men every night at the Twins Vale and wasn't shy about it. The masked man had almost given up hope, thinking the rumors were true, but now he saw it with his own eyes. Everyone knew she had left with some man last night and hadn't been seen since, but the rumors were flying. The heroine felt another killer headache coming on and didn't know how to deal with it. From the dark void, the Knight Commander pulled out a young woman who was in deep trouble. He couldn't just walk away when he saw the beautiful stranger in need of help. That wouldn't be right. The golden-eyed man said that if he was wrong, she could refuse, and that would be the end of it. Era stared blankly at the man's hand, not understanding who he was or what he wanted. Her headache was gone, and now she felt calm, as if all her problems had vanished into thin air. Then Era looked up at her mysterious savior's face and saw something familiar in it. She was sure this wasn't a dream, and this was the man she had been looking for all her life. The villains started yelling at the man who saved her, calling him a bastard who didn't know what he was doing. He shouted that they had found her first, and no one was going to ruin their fun. The heroine decided to handle this herself. She knew these guys and their game. Era told her savior she could handle these punks on her own and thanked him for his help with a confident smile. When the jerk started disrespecting her, she immediately swung her hand to slap him, realizing she would never let anyone belittle her again. The next thing you know, a loud slap echoed, and everyone was stunned and confused. The black mask covering the villain's face flew off, and everyone started to realize that things were getting out of hand. If Era was a slut, then this man was exactly the same, because they were both just looking for a one-night stand. The heroine asked if they were both here looking for a night of passion and not expecting anything more. Lord Neve froze instantly when the girl called out his name, realizing things were not as simple as they seemed. Since Era was once the Crown Prince's fiancée, she would know all the knights of the Royal Guard and their personalities, especially those who guarded the Crown Prince's palace and knew more about his affairs than anyone else in the kingdom. Hearing their lady's words, the three men were stunned, unable to understand how she knew so much about them. The heroine smiled and asked how His Highness the Crown Prince was doing and whether he was worried about her now. Era suggested they talk for a while, as she was more desperate than ever to know about her ex. Sir Neve replied with a blank expression that, unfortunately, he knew nothing about the recent events in the kingdom. Those bullies ran off with their tails between their legs, saying they had made a huge mistake and would behave themselves in the future. The heroine said that it was finally quiet, and she could truly focus on her thoughts and plans. The Knight Commander asked if the young lady often got into so much trouble. Era admitted she had made a big mistake yesterday and would be more careful about making friends in the future. The commander's expression immediately turned sad, as this was not at all what he wanted to hear. The heroine thanked the man, saying that thanks to him, everything was fine and she felt much better now. She took off her mask and asked the stranger why he had disappeared that morning, as she had hoped to see him again. The man said distantly that he didn't understand what the young lady was talking about and would rather leave it in the past. "Speak," she said, placing her hand on his collarbone. "You're talking nonsense. You obviously remember everything clearly." She confessed, "I really wanted to see you again, but I didn't know how to find you without causing a big commotion." Era said, "I completely forgot to thank you for your company. I hope you weren't put off by my absent-mindedness." The Knight Commander touched her hand and said, "Don't mind it. It was all I could do anyway." Then he gently moved her hand away and looked at her, fully understanding how she felt about him. He said in a sad voice, "To you, I was just a one-night stand, wasn't I? Nothing more." A silence fell between them, each contemplating how their fates had intertwined at that moment. At dawn the next day, Erin knew she had to sort out her thoughts before the grand event at the palace. Her personal maid, Casper, relayed the head maid's words. "My lady, please be sure to conduct yourself properly at today's celebration." However, at that moment, the heroine was so lost in her own thoughts that she didn't hear a single word the maid said. The personal maid thought with a pout, wondering if her mistress had heard her at all, or was completely lost in her own world. Era couldn't understand why, of all days, she had to go to the Imperial Palace when her mind was on someone else. There was a banquet at the Imperial Palace to celebrate the victory over the monsters, and everyone expected to see the heroine there. This would be the heroine's first visit to the Imperial Palace. Since she had fled the scene yesterday, she was shocked to discover that this stranger had the ability to cure her terrible illness. This power seemed to be activated when she touched his hand, and now Era couldn't get this fact out of her mind. The heroine decided she needed to try something else, and hoped her next move would bring some good luck. She had messed up again and didn't know how to fix her relationship with the stranger who fascinated her so much. The girl sincerely hoped to see the man again, so she could talk to him about what was troubling her now. The scene shifts to the Imperial Palace, where all the guests have gathered for the grand event. They couldn't believe the rumors about the young lady were true, that she would actually appear at the party tonight. A lady like her was a disgrace to the royal family, and most people wished she would stay out of sight. The heroine told herself to endure it, as it was nothing compared to the messes she had been through. The emperor ordered Marcus Byron and his knights to be brought in for the celebration, as everyone was waiting for them. The man bowed deeply, saying he was immensely grateful for the opportunity to be here. Rose Byron respectfully greeted His Majesty, knowing how important this moment was for the royal family. When the heroine spotted a familiar figure among the guests, she was completely stunned, and her heart began to pound. It was the man with the golden eyes, who had become her symbol of hope and strength during the most difficult time of her life. Now, Era truly felt she had found her sleeping pill. Knowing this man could completely change everything around her. To see them together again after 25 years was simply incredible for everyone present. Liam Cloaca Junius greeted the Count, saying he had brought a great victory for the Empire and its people. Rose Byron said that during those difficult times, he was simply fulfilling his duty to the Emperor and the country. He was once the captain of the Royal Guard, a loyal servant to the Emperor who served him with all his heart. But shortly after the first prince's death, the Emperor suddenly granted him the abandoned lands of the north, which shocked everyone. The head of the Empire made the Sword of the Empire the new Lord of the North and named those lands, which was a major event. Liam Cloaca Junius ordered the Marquis to win the war against the monsters, as it was crucial for the nation's security. All the nobles knew in their hearts that this was nothing more than an exile to the middle of nowhere. The northern territories lacked divine protection and were overrun with monsters, posing a real test for all knights. The Emperor had always known that the Count had lost 3 sons in that war, which left him heartbroken. Liam Cloaca Junius said he was truly sorry, as he himself had also lost his eldest son. Rose Byron declared that his children had died heroically for the Empire and that their memory would live on in our hearts forever. The Emperor declared that excessive loyalty is a poison to anyone and can lead to a tragic end. He promised to ensure a proper burial and to never forget the merits of the knights who died for the country. Count Byron announced that, as a reward for his merits, he had a request for His Majesty. He announced that he wanted to adopt River, the commander of the Byron Knights, a man worthy of this honor. All imperial nobles receive the temple's blessing at birth and are registered in the Register of Nobles with the Emperor's permission. Adoption also required the permission of the Empire's leader to ensure everything followed the rules and traditions of this ancient nation. River, the commander of the Byron Knights, respectfully greeted His Majesty, understanding that this moment was crucial for everyone now. The heroine learned the name of the man she had dreamed and thought so much about. She was ecstatic, as she had worried she wouldn't be able to find him in such a large crowd. As it turned out, Era was caught off guard by the news that the commanders were returning to the north. The fact that River had no surname, meaning he was a commoner, came as a huge surprise to everyone. The commander explained that he was grateful to the Count for giving him the opportunity to take up his sword and serve the Empire, which meant a great deal. River revealed that he had lost his family in a monster attack, which had devastated him. The Emperor said that it was rare to hear such a thing during a war, but what's done is done. He declared that he must grant this request for the sake of those who sacrificed for the Empire, as they had given their lives for the country. The head of the Empire motioned for the steward, who was waiting for orders and ready to carry out any task, to come forward. Liam Cloaca Junius stamped his seal next to the name River Byron in the Register of Nobles, which changed everything. The Emperor announced that he permitted Count Byron to adopt River, a decision that had his blessing. Then, Liam Cloaca Junius bestowed the surname Byron upon the commander, symbolizing a new beginning for him. The Count and River thanked His Majesty, knowing this moment was crucial for their future. The heroine knew it was time to slip away, as the last thing she wanted to see was that guy's sour face. She sincerely hoped everything would be all right, regardless of any trouble that might come next. Suddenly, someone called her name, and Era spun around, which caught her a bit off guard and made her a little wary. The heroine apologized to her uncle for being late, saying she didn't know he was already waiting here. Baron Addis Anton, the crown princess's father, said they could dispense with the pleasantries, as everyone knew the score. The man guessed that Era's father was still ill, which annoyed him and made him worry about the family. The Baron said that if he had known earlier, his niece wouldn't have had to come at such a tense time. Addis Anton said he was truly sorry for being powerless as the head of the family. The heroine disagreed, saying her uncle had already helped her a lot despite having his own matters to attend to. So the man said, "Would your niece be willing to become a lady-in-waiting to the crown princess?" Era froze upon hearing her uncle drop this bombshell. Addis Anton smiled slyly like a fox, reminding her that they were family and that family should share weal and woe. Our heroine couldn't believe her ears. Her uncle now wanted her to become a glorified servant to the crown princess. The story shifts to a drawing room where 2 men are sitting face to face, discussing business. The Emperor said that as soon as the Count returned, he felt a sense of relief. It gave him hope. He went on to say that he had been terribly nervous because he had wronged the Count and didn't know how to make amends. After all, the Emperor could have sent any knight to the north, but he chose to trust the Count. Count Byron interjected that he was just following orders and wasn't seeking any glory. The emperor knew this man was not afraid to get his hands dirty to protect the empire's security. His Majesty hoped the count's son would become a loyal servant like his father. Rose said that River had spent his entire life at war, which had forged his spirit and character. The Knight Commander was more loyal to the Empire than anyone, always ready to fight for its honor. The Emperor began to laugh, saying that River first needed to learn how to be a nobleman so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. He shouldn't feel inferior because of his origins. This was important for his future. Before his return, the Emperor suggested the Count find a bride for the Knight Commander to consolidate his position in society. Marrying a girl from a noble family would help him gain trust among the aristocracy and friends of the Empire. The Emperor promised to help him find a worthy bride, as River could not have any unnecessary entanglements in the future. In the year 957 of the imperial calendar, a new prophecy emerged in the Cloic Empire. The prophecy would occur on the day the roar of the Golden Lion shook the heavens, a sign that a great event was coming. At that time, the lost star would fall from the sky to the earth, and its fall would be a landmark moment for everyone in the Empire. That year, 2 girls were born into the Goldwyn family, destined to change the fate of their family and the entire empire. Era Goldwyn, daughter of the Duchess who died of childbed fever, was destined for great fortune and love. Then there was Judith Anton, daughter of Baron Anton from a collateral branch of the family, who had always lived in the shadow of her more famous rival. The entire empire believed that this prophecy about the heroine and her role in the kingdom's future would be crucial. Era had been prepared for her destiny since birth, but her heart was filled with fear for the future. At the age of 10, she was engaged to crown Prince Albert Clois Zeus, which marked the beginning of her difficult path to happiness. Every year, at the Empire's founding celebration, the heroine stood by his side. Even then, Era understood that to Albert, she was just a soulless, ordinary object, and she could not fall in love with him. The little girl cried to her father, saying she didn't want to go to the celebration and was afraid to see the crown prince. Era confessed to her father that she was afraid of the crown prince and didn't know how to deal with him. The noblewoman comforted her, saying that the crown prince had the blood of Zeus and was not interested in girls. Everything was supposed to change after the wedding. Then, everything would come true, and her fate would be sealed, for by then the crown prince was supposed to find his true love, and they would become the perfect couple for the empire. But on their wedding night, the only thing that changed was our heroine, who knew something was seriously wrong. In that moment, Era's world completely collapsed, and she realized she had lost everything she held dear. When they threw her out of the palace, Judith Anton was standing right next to Albert. She looked at Era with a smile on her face, as if enjoying her pain and humiliation. Rumor had it that His Highness had finally found his true love and completed the sealing ceremony with her. Miss Judith must have been terribly jealous because Miss Era stole all the spotlight, leaving her in the shadows. It was said that after the engagement was broken, the illegitimate daughter of the Goldwyn family fled to some poor backwater where no one knew or cared about her. Era disappeared from public view, hiding in her family's estate. When her father fell ill, the vassals began to argue over who should serve as regent during this difficult time. They suggested that Baron Anton take over, as he was the father of the current crown princess. The vassals promised to support him as they always had when faced with difficult issues. The Baron swore he would do everything in his power not to bring shame upon the family, as honor was everything to him. And just like that, the heroine's uncle became the regent of the Goldwyn family without her or her father's consent, which was terrible. Era couldn't understand how she had never noticed the contemptuous way that guy looked at her before. The Baron grinned and told her he was just kidding, but she didn't believe him. The crown princess's father admitted that his daughter was probably going stir-crazy alone in that empty mansion. The guy saw Duke Schultz and said he had to go, as he had something to attend to. You know, in the great temple, the heroine's father was lying in bed. In one of the rooms, Era sat beside him, asking what she should do, as she felt completely lost after her breakup with the crown prince. Her father said he was certain that Era was his biological daughter. The man promised he would find a way to prove it and restore Era's honor without a doubt. The high priest entered the room and noticed they had another visitor. The man asked if he was interrupting, as the girl seemed to be lost in thought. He mentioned that you look much better today than you have recently, which is good news for everyone. Era froze when the high priest mentioned that Baron Anton had improved the conditions of the sanatorium. Rumor had it that the Baron was spending money like water without any thought for the consequences. It was said that Baron Anton was much more generous than Duke Goldwyn, which came as a huge shock to everyone. Era immediately understood that her uncle didn't have that much money, which meant he was squandering her family's fortune. The high priest anxiously asked if she was all right and if she needed any help with the matter. The heroine smiled and told the man she had to go, but she would visit again later. Era began to blame herself for so easily handing over the management of the estate to her uncle. It caused her immense pain. By the time she returned to the estate and learned the news about her father, everything had changed and been turned upside down. The estate was full of new servants, and the vassals excluded her from everything, which greatly frustrated Era. All Era could do was lie in her empty room, enduring an endless, unrelenting headache. The heroine realized that if she just sat back and did nothing, her uncle would take the estate from her. First, she decided to get rid of her insomnia and headaches, so she could finally return to a normal life. In the midst of all this pain, Era couldn't think straight. She just wanted it to stop. She squeezed her eyes shut, not even noticing a man with a worried expression approaching. A familiar voice asked what she was doing here and if she needed help. Just then, River anxiously asked if she had been drinking in the temple and how she was feeling, because she might be unwell, and suggested she get some rest. The heroine was completely surprised to see him in this temple. She was very surprised, and it felt strange. Era guessed he was here to get the high priest's approval for his adoption. The girl felt like she had hit the jackpot. She couldn't believe it and felt amazing. River started to panic when Miss Goldwyn began to collapse. He didn't know what to do, and scared him. The commander quickly supported her by the shoulders to prevent her from falling and to help her. He felt a sense of responsibility. The headache was finally gone, and she was relieved, feeling much lighter already. At that moment, she knew she had to get River on her side to get rid of this pain and finally take control. To do that, Era had to keep this man by her side at all costs. It was crucial. She leaned back, looking straight into the Knight Commander's eyes, seeking support and understanding. River announced he would call a priest right away. He had to help her and couldn't waste any time. She grabbed his hand, telling him to wait, saying she needed to explain first and calm down. Era wasn't ready to talk about her headaches, so she said she didn't want to make a fuss and draw attention. She explained that her father was being treated at the temple, and she didn't want to bother the priests unnecessarily. He didn't believe her. He knew she needed help, he could feel it, but he was conflicted about what to do next. She told him that he had already helped her a lot by catching her before she fainted, and it meant a great deal. River was speechless, completely bewildered by the girl's words. He didn't know how to react, so he just kept his mouth shut. Era thanked the man for saving her from embarrassment, saying she felt much better and was grateful for his help. She pointed out that he always helped her when she was in trouble, which meant a lot to her. River guessed she had recognized him in the crowd, which made him a little uneasy. He could feel the tension rising. Era smiled and said that after the victory celebration, everyone knew him, which was completely true. Everyone was talking about him. He was the war hero who saved the North from the monsters, and now he was famous throughout the Empire. Tomorrow, his name would be known throughout the entire Empire. People would talk about his heroic deeds and praise him for a long time. A commoner becoming the adopted son of a noble was rare and raised eyebrows among everyone around. River took this as a warning not to anger the nobles, something everyone needed to remember forever. She moved closer and told him to take it as a piece of advice, which was especially important for him right now. She also said that she wanted to fully repay the man for his kindness and care towards her. Being so close to the young lady, River Byron's face instantly turned red, and he didn't know how to react. Later, the two men greeted the high priest, Amadeus, whom they both knew. He smiled and greeted the count, saying it had been a long time and that he had missed him. Rose Byron apologized for not being able to come sooner and meet with his friends. The high priest called the count an old-fashioned man and said he really missed his old friend. Amadeus noted that Rose had always been loyal to the Cloic Empire and had practiced the faith of the god Janius in his actions. The high priest expressed his hope that his adopted son would also follow in his footsteps and become a worthy man. In this matter, River had to be a loyal and devout man, just like his predecessor. The knight commander's eyes widened, and he looked at the high priest in shock and disbelief. River received Amadeus's blessing in the name of the eternal child, the god Janius, which was a major event. The priest baptized the commander, naming him River Byron, and spoke in a solemn and respectful tone. Now, the guy's name was officially on the list of noble citizens of the Cloic Empire. The ceremony was rather simple, which made River think that Miss Goldwyn had a point. Earlier, the commander had told her he didn't need her help and that he could handle it himself. Era said in a cold voice that in the Cloic Empire, bloodline is everything. After the Emperor's personal approval, no one would openly oppose River, but the nobles would surely trip him up behind His Majesty's back. If they decided to move against him again, Marquis Byron could also become a target for the nobles. River was sure that no one in their right mind would want to make an enemy of the Emperor's old friend. But this woman had just said that among all these nobles, only the Count would treat you as an equal. The wind picked up, almost drowning out Era's words to the new nobleman. Right here and now, if this lady was right, then the temple and the Emperor would not protect them from their enemies. The knight commander clenched his fists, a fire of anger almost consuming him. Era suggested they have a proper talk in Twinville tomorrow to discuss all the details and come up with a plan of action. River now had no choice but to go along with Miss Goldwyn's arrangements and take her advice. The rain that night was relentless, creating a heavy and ominous atmosphere around them. The heroine's black mask fell to the ground and was left there, a reminder of her past and all her secrets. River decided to take a chance, even if it meant just being her plaything for a night and nothing more. At the dinner party, the Crown Princess's father mentioned that Era had been coming home very late recently. This worried him greatly. Word on the street was that the girl had been spending a lot of time with her father in the temple lately. The uncle wanted to know if his brother had woken up, as it would be a big deal for all of them, and he was concerned. The protagonist forced a smile, saying her father had not yet awakened, which was very upsetting to her. Era explained that when she went to visit, the high priest happened to stop by, so she had to stay a little longer. The Crown Princess's father was completely caught off guard by the news of the high priest's visit today. Edith Anton promised that he would be sure to express the Godwin family's gratitude to the man. The protagonist immediately understood that her uncle was referring to a donation, which set off alarm bells in her mind. According to the rules, the temporary head of the family was not allowed to use any assets without the permission of the family head. But the girl's uncle was squandering money wantonly, with no regard for the family's future or best interests. This meant that either his vassals were supporting him or he was lining his own pockets, neither of which was permissible. My uncle said he overheard my niece and Sir River talking for a long time, which made him suspicious. I know that in the early stages of this game, I can't make any mistakes. Era replayed her earlier conversation with the knight commander in her mind and began to ponder his words. Is something bothering you? I'm asking because we must be honest with each other now. In the 25 years of fighting against the monsters, the Emperor had never once sent reinforcements to the north. How ridiculous was that? When the war hero returned, they didn't even hold a parade for him, which was a huge slap in the face to everyone. His only reward for winning was just a promotion and a title. That was it. River waved his hand, saying he didn't understand politics, and, frankly, he didn't care right now. He firmly believed that those guys knew exactly what they were doing and how to best handle the situation. The Emperor was indeed soft-hearted, but security was always his top priority. Ever since the previous Emperor was killed in that rebellion, the new Emperor had been firmly against expanding the army, a point he had made very clear. That's why the North received almost no help. It was all just for show, not genuine support. River said that the ladies seemed to want him to doubt the Emperor's intentions, but he wouldn't fall for it. The protagonist smiled and said he could think whatever he wanted, but she would stick to her position. Era promised she was willing to help the knight, as she only wanted the best for him and hoped for his support in return. The protagonist's uncle mentioned that they hadn't had dinner together in a long time, which he found rather sad. He wondered if his niece disliked being with them, as she was usually so friendly. The protagonist smiled and said she was just feeling unwell, but that didn't stop her from being polite. Baron Anton's wife, Marcella Anton, declared she was tired of hearing the same old platitudes. She wanted something different. Edith tried to object, but the woman sharply asked if she had said something wrong to offend him. The Baroness said that the little brat was always complaining about her health, yet she would sneak out to Twin Town at night. Era froze when the woman claimed the girl went there to fool around with men, leaving her completely at a loss. Marcella Anton confessed that she was already embarrassed in front of the other ladies because everyone knew about Ira's affairs and her deeds. Baron Anton's eldest son, Lionel Anton, smiled in full agreement with his mother. The Baron asked in disappointment what the world was coming to if such a filthy place was so popular among the young nobility. His Majesty would not approve of going to such a place, so the eldest son must always be careful. The Baroness supported her husband, warning Lionel not to attract unnecessary attention to himself and to stay out of the spotlight. The woman added that she sincerely hoped Era would also understand this and learn from what was happening around her. She declared that girls should not bring shame upon their families and needed to act according to their social status. The protagonist, with a stiff smile on her face, said she understood everything, though in her heart she didn't accept it at all. The next day, the Godwin family's private doctor, a man named Anglesey, prescribed the lady some strong painkillers. Era asked if her uncle had revealed any important information about her condition or feelings to anyone. The doctor said that the master hoped his niece would recover quickly and return to her duties. The man tipped his hat in greeting and added that he would see her at their next follow-up appointment, where they would discuss her health in more detail. Era knew she shouldn't tell the doctor that the medicine wasn't working and that she was still in pain every day. Usually, she would just endure the headaches and take a few pills, but now she had River by her side. Our protagonist thought to herself that she no longer needed this medicine. Now she just needed Sir River to agree to her proposal, so that the plan could truly come to fruition. The maid was stunned when her mistress announced she wanted to go to Twin Town again, which really took her by surprise. Casper reminded her that the Baroness had just scolded her yesterday for being away from home too much lately. Ira's personal maid complained that she couldn't keep pretending to be her every night to cover for her. The protagonist gently took Casper's hand, trying to soothe her with her kindness. In that moment, Era explained that she had a very important meeting today and couldn't afford to look disheveled for it. She assured the maid that she would not go out at night anymore and would try to stick to her schedule in the coming days. Then, the protagonist asked Casper to help her get dressed, as she had to be especially irresistible today. The personal maid was even curious about what this important meeting was and who would be there. Era decided to use all her feminine charms to ensure River wouldn't refuse her and would agree to her meeting proposal. The story unfolds in Earl Byron's territory, where the knights are training. River noticed that despite all the difficulties, the soldiers were still in high spirits. They seemed more motivated than usual, igniting hope in the hearts of their commander and allies. "Sir, that's not quite the case," replied the captain's subordinate. "The knights not only won the long war, but also received an audience with His Majesty." This was a huge deal for the soldiers of the Empire. There was no greater honor than meeting the Emperor, and it was enough to change their lives. More importantly, His Majesty had graciously approved Lord Rose Byron's request. This unprecedented decision was a first in the history of the Clocka Empire, so the knights felt proud and hopeful. However, River remembered the words of the blonde Lady Godwin, which made him start thinking about the future of their country. The red-haired girl admitted that she was worried when the supplies didn't arrive on time. She thought the royal family had abandoned them, but she quickly realized that wasn't the case. After all, the Emperor had even promised to take care of the families of the fallen soldiers and do everything he could for them. The girl was happy to be able to share this good news with their families, bringing them hope for a better future. River wouldn't deny that the Emperor had promised them a reward, but it was just an empty promise. One of the captains shouted, "10-minute break. Soldiers, take a rest and clear your heads." The newly minted noble tried to tell himself that everything would be fine, but the worries lingered. River felt he had to do everything he could for the North. After all, the fate of his people was in his hands. But a second later, the man erupted. 2,000 gold coins? This is an insult. Our annual budget is 4,000 Rose. Byron told his adopted son to calm down, not to panic, and to remain composed. The Baron showed the knight commander the Emperor's decree, where it was all written in black and white. The past flashed through River's mind, his soldiers rejoicing at receiving the Emperor's reward. His face fell. Things were not going at all the way he had hoped, and hope was fading fast. River bowed and pleaded with the Lord to reconsider, still holding out the best hope for his people. The knight commander said in a heavy voice that the families of the fallen soldiers should not have to suffer from hunger anymore. He begged his father to at least give them food and resources to rebuild their homes and help those who had nothing. River looked into his lord's cold eyes and knew he would not change his mind. He remembered everything the blonde girl had told him. River was finally convinced that Lady Godwin was right. The Emperor did not want the North to recover. It was obvious. Outside, it was pouring rain, the cold drops hitting the ground like the sky's tears, mirroring his mood. The place was crowded with masked people, whispering their plans and dreaming of a different world. River was there too, waiting for the girl to appear, hoping for a meeting that could change everything. He froze when he heard a familiar voice behind him, his heart pounding in his chest. The protagonist asked if he had been waiting long. River told Lady Godwin he had just arrived at the place, his heart starting to race. Era pointed out that he had prepared everything for this meeting, and she was excited about it. She was talking about the mask, saying it suited the Knight Commander very well. River said he knew that wearing a mask was a sort of unwritten rule in this place. Our girl mentioned that some nobles, however, would stroll in without one, like the newcomers, those who had nothing to hide in the crowd tonight. Era took River's hand and suggested they find a private place to talk, away from prying ears, as there were too many nosy people around who could very well overhear their conversation. She led the dark-haired man through the hall, and he felt a bit strange being with her. River couldn't figure out why his heart was beating so fast. He was just here to talk business, right? Era stopped and said this was the perfect spot for them to have a frank conversation. She took off her mask and said she felt the commander had something to say, but was holding back. River silently agreed, as he had come here precisely to accept Lady Godwin's offer of cooperation. The man pointed out that the lady had offered to help the North, so he wanted to know exactly what kind of help she was referring to for his people in the North. The protagonist thought to herself that they must have learned of His Majesty's decision by now. All that was left was to convince this man to agree to her terms and support her plan. Era explained that the Godwin lands had 3 harvests a year, which brought them a steady income. She said that if he agreed to cooperate with her, she would provide the North with resources in return. The protagonist added that she had a great deal of money, as she came from a ducal family and knew her own worth. Things would be much easier if Era could reclaim her position as the head of her family. She said the first thing she needed to do was return to high society, which was the best place to gather intelligence and expand her influence. River pointed out that she was currently at the center of a scandal. Era said she was fully aware of all the rumors about her, which was precisely why she needed the war hero River's achievements and reputation. This man was an idol of hope for the common people, so even the nobility couldn't easily ignore him. When the social season began, River would be the center of attention at the court ball. The protagonist asked him to introduce her to everyone as his partner. Just then, a man in a dark cloak knocked on a wooden door. The healer peeked out, addressed him as my lord, and said he was waiting for him. The crown princess's father knew that today was Era's scheduled follow-up appointment. The healer reported that he had mixed the substance into the girl's medicine, just as the master had requested. Anglesey was sure there would be results soon, as the lady would take all her medicine. Edith Anton declared this was excellent news, as Era would soon be dead. The crown princess's father ordered the healer to give her this medicine next time, as it was now time to get rid of his brother's daughter for good. The events continue in the Empress's chambers. The woman announced that the social season was about to begin, and everyone was preparing for the major social event. Judith Anton arrived at the palace just as preparations for the upcoming ball were beginning. The Empress, Servian Cloica Schultz, said that time flies and that it had been a whole year since they met. The crown princess had received the guest list for the court ball and was going over it carefully. Judith needed to learn how to manage the inner palace as soon as possible, which required a special set of skills. The Empress told her that if she ran into any trouble, she should ask Lady Oakland for help. Judith was a tricky character, especially since Era always understood the Empress perfectly and helped with everything. The Crown Princess wondered if they should still invite the Godwins, just to avoid any drama. Servian Cloica Schultz said she was asking too many questions and needed to cool down a bit. Judith Anton apologized for saying something foolish. She didn't mean to seem aggressive or nosy. She explained that she just wanted to know if Lady Godwin could come to the ball, and that was all. The Empress walked to the window and said sadly that Era wouldn't be coming tonight anyway. Meanwhile, our protagonist was in the hallway, chatting with River. The man understood that the lady just wanted to use him to reclaim her position as the head of her family. She was using the northern supplies as an excuse to achieve her goals and build her own power. The protagonist couldn't understand why she felt so exposed, as if he had seen right through her. Using was the only word that could truly describe the relationship between them. At this moment, Era was so desperate to convince the man that she felt she might have come on a little too strong. River couldn't understand why someone making such an attractive offer looked so uneasy. The man said that the lady's offer was very beneficial to him and his people in the north. He explained that he was afraid of the crown prince's wrath, as she was close to him and might provoke him. The protagonist said in a cold voice that he would not interfere in her affairs or stand in her way. Era was sure that the crown prince didn't take her seriously and couldn't influence his decisions. She touched River's hair and told him to think only of the people he had to protect. They were both betting everything, so failure was not an option. River felt that people would start to wonder why they were together. The protagonist said they would just tell everyone it was love at first sight. The most beautiful woman in the empire had charmed an innocent knight who knew nothing of high society. River tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear and whispered that this could backfire on her. The protagonist leaned into the knight commander's arms and asked what his answer was. River felt as if her gaze was about to burn right through him, and he couldn't suppress his desire. He had no idea why he couldn't push the noble lady away. The knight commander replied that he agreed and leaned closer to Ira's face. The next second, the man's lips were on the protagonist's. The next day, all the high society ladies were gossiping about Lady Godwin's return to Twin Town. This time, the girl was with Sir River, who had just joined the Byron family. Many people saw them being affectionate. You might think that Lady Godwin doesn't care about her family's reputation at all. The Baroness returned to the estate shouting that Era had gone completely mad. The woman asked excitedly if just messing around in Twin Town wasn't enough. Marcella raised her hand in anger, questioning how the girl could be so shameless as to fool around with men. The next moment, the protagonist felt a stinging slap across her cheek. Era realized it was time to move on to the next phase of her plan. The protagonist quietly apologized to her aunt and admitted that she had fallen head over heels in love with a man. She knew she had messed up and was especially sorry to Her Highness the Crown Princess, her aunt, and her uncle, which was truly unseemly. Era pleaded with her aunt to help her make amends by sending her to Montgrace to atone for her sins. It was basically a sanctuary for the poor and sick on the outskirts of the capital, a place no one in their right mind would want to go. There was a constant influx of beggars and sick people who usually ended up dying of starvation and neglect. For the Baroness, Era volunteering to be sent to that godforsaken place was a major victory. After a moment, the woman said she would write to Montgrace, and Era could start packing for the trip. Marcella suggested the girls stay there until the end of the social season to avoid any unwanted attention. If Era showed everyone how remorseful she was, then no one would dare judge her for her past actions. The protagonist timidly asked if her aunt really thought that would work in her case. The Baroness promised that once Era returned, everything would go back to normal and they could sort things out together. Then Marcella Anton left the room, slamming the door behind her, leaving Era alone to contemplate her future. The protagonist smiled and smoothed her hair, a hint of excitement in her eyes about the upcoming changes. She said slyly that she sincerely hoped her aunt's words would come true and her life would get back on track. From the note, the man deduced that his mistress was in trouble again and needed his immediate attention. He desperately wanted to know who Ira's lover was. This time, the servant asked his master if he was really going back to the imperial capital again. The man replied that if he disappeared for too long, his mistress might forget him and start a new life without him. In the palace, the man stopped and said that Twin Town had been restless lately, which was concerning. Albert pleaded with the Baron not to anger the Emperor, as he could lose his position, which would affect everyone. Byron said he had already taken measures to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again. The Crown Prince patted the Baron's shoulder and said, "Good." He added that there were too many eyes on them now, which meant they had to be careful with their words and actions. Albert requested his maternal grandfather, Duke Rabian Schultz, to help the Baron, who was new to the Imperial Council. The Crown Prince smiled and asked him not to embarrass himself, and everyone nodded in agreement. At the council, the ministers of the Empire greeted His Majesty, and everyone rose to their feet as a sign of respect. The Emperor announced that they were to begin discussing matters of vital importance to the entire empire. Liam Clocka Janus unrolled a parchment and read out the first issue, which was crucial for the region's future. The emperor would discuss the irrigation project for the western region with Duke Lindemann upon his return. The retired Marquis Hugh Cunningham told the supreme leader that it was time to discuss funding for the reconstruction of the North. His Majesty declared that as far as he was concerned, the matter was settled and required no further discussion. All we discussed at the last meeting was the victory bonus, which sparked a lot of debate. The war is over, but the people of the North are still living in ruins and need the kingdom's help. The emperor pointed out that the irrigation project in the West would be very costly, and we were short on funds. Edith Byron raised his hand and said there was a way to solve this problem that could help everyone. To rebuild the region, we need manpower, people who can handle the hard work on the ground. The emperor asked if the crown princess's father had any helpful suggestions. The earl proposed recalling the northerners who were scattered all over to rebuild the region. The North couldn't take in all the war orphans, so the temple and other manors took them in and took care of them. Now we are seeing the consequences, as 25 years is a long time, and it has tested everyone's patience. The children who lost their parents in the war are now grown up and just trying to find their way. If we select those with skills or resources, we can help the North get back on its feet. The problem was this method had its limitations, and some of those present weren't so sure about it. Anton here said he had other ideas that might really help rebuild the region. The crown prince froze when the baron suggested investigating Twin Town, which could change everything in the empire. A huge casino operates there every night, along with auctions that attract large crowds and investors. But no one knows who the real owner of the place is, which makes the local police and citizens very suspicious. We need to find out if Twin Vale is paying taxes and if they are laundering money, as that could be dangerous for everyone. The emperor said with a smile that he had been hearing that name a lot lately and was curious about what was happening there. He entrusted the matter to the crown prince, and the Ministry of Finance would support his investigation. As soon as the words were spoken, the meeting ended, leaving only Albert clenching his fists, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. The consequences that followed. Sometime later, the carriage stopped in front of the Montigris orphanage, an important sanctuary for the destitute. A caretaker greeted the lady, saying they had been waiting for her and were in desperate need of her help and support. Era smiled and said the journey was smooth, as the orphanage was close to where she was staying. The woman introduced herself as Ellie and explained that she had been managing Montigris since last spring and loved her job. Then, our protagonist also introduced herself, expressing her happiness to be there and her readiness to help all those in need. The orphanage was established by the temple to help the homeless and the sick. But after the war with the monsters, the homeless population surged, and the temple could no longer sustain the orphanage on its own. So the priests began to rely on donations from the nobility to provide necessary aid and support. Montigris was funded by the Goldwyn family, and the Duke would donate generously every year to help those in need. He made sure that every penny was spent where it was needed most and not in anyone's pockets, which was crucial for everyone. Because of this, no one in Montigris went hungry, as aid was always flowing in. This was only a year ago, so Era couldn't understand what had happened and why everything had become so different. The air was filled with the stench of death, and the cries of hungry children could be heard, which was heartbreaking and terrifying for everyone. The protagonist asked why the sick were all lying on the floor without any help from a doctor. Ellie explained that since the Duke fell ill, the Goldwyn family had stopped their donations. She was completely stunned when she realized the lady knew nothing about this. She frantically thanked the lady for all her help and for never abandoning them. The protagonist thought to herself that the priests must have embezzled the donations and were now lying directly to her face. But Era would be returning to the estate soon, so there was no point in lying. The truth would come out sooner or later. The Goldwyn family's vassals wouldn't have just stopped donating, which meant it was her uncle pulling the strings. The protagonist deduced that it must have been Edith Byron and the butler named Giles who had misappropriated the funds and covered it up. She remembered it was her uncle who brought Giles to the estate, and he had quickly won over the family and their friends. Era took a necklace out of her pocket and told Ellie to use it to treat the most critically ill. The protagonist also told her to give food to all the hungry people, as they needed to regain their strength. Ellie's eyes sparkled with joy as she thanked the lady for her generosity and willingness to help. The maid asked if the lady was really going to stay in this place and help all the poor souls in the shelter. The protagonist smiled and said that they needed to meet someone here. Ellie led them to a room where noble ladies often stayed. It was quiet and peaceful here, and this spot was the best place in Mont Tigris to watch the sunset, guaranteed to be an unforgettable sight. The protagonist was stunned by the sight and froze for a moment. The director added with a warm smile that while it couldn't compare to the Duke's estate, it was quite comfortable. Era decided to ask if any other nobles came to help the poor souls. It turned out that after the donations were cut off, the situation took a nosedive. But they still come sometimes, Ellie replied with a knowing smile. The servants were busy unloading all of Mrs. Goldwyn's luggage. After everything was settled, Casper returned to her mistress's room. She told the lady that she had watched all the servants get into the carriage, which then sped away. They didn't even say when they would be back to pick her up, as if they had no intention of returning at all. Era immediately understood that her uncle did not want her to come back. At first, she thought it was just a misunderstanding, as he was the only family she had left. But as time went on, she began to notice more and more things that confirmed her fears. For instance, the cold look in her uncle's eyes when he looked at her, her father's belongings disappearing from the estate, and how he had silently taken over the manager's position. And then there was the report the protagonist found in the study today. Era had done so while the council was in session, hoping to find something before heading to Mont Tigris. The protagonist was sure there had to be a clue hidden somewhere. As she started to look at the next document, her eyes widened in an instant. It was a strange report, completely different from the duchy's usual ones, with an absurdly high transaction amount. If such a large sum of money was spent, it meant a large quantity of items, possibly even luxury goods, had been purchased. Era decided to find out where the money had gone. Seeing her mistress so lost in thought, Casper guessed that something must be seriously bothering her. So she decided to change the subject as quickly as possible. The girl began to look around the room cheerfully, admitting that she had even started to worry when her mistress decided to come to this place. She must have a plan, because the lady wouldn't come here for no reason. That's right, there was a plan. The protagonist told her personal maid that this place was actually a secret rendezvous spot for high society ladies. Casper immediately blurted out, "What does that mean?" She had no idea what her mistress was plotting this time. Mont Tigris was a popular place for the rich to try and wash away their sins, like ladies with a less than honorable past. They helped the poor, care for the sick, and pray to Zeus. A noble staying in this godforsaken place was supposed to prove their sincerity. But honestly, that was just gossip circulating in high society. For years, Mont Tigris had received donations from the duchy, with plenty of food and priests to care for the sick. So there was no real volunteer work, which meant the nobles were just using it as a place for secret trysts. Casper was completely baffled. She had never heard any of this before. Era explained that nobles wouldn't talk about it, and Mont Tigris was so remote that it was easy to disappear. The protagonist deduced that the priests must be fully aware of it too. Casper asked, "My lady, where did you hear all this?" The lady said she heard it in Twinvale, but the protagonist wondered who had told her. If that person knew something like this, he was definitely no ordinary man, which piqued Mrs. Goldwyn's interest. She couldn't figure out why he would tell her this. That evening, the protagonist put on a cloak and began to carry out her plan under the cover of darkness. The man from Twinvale held some extremely valuable information. He knew where to find people and how to approach them. After a while, Era found what she was looking for. The girl tried to get closer without being seen, but a twig suddenly snapped under her foot, giving away her position. Era was terrified. She couldn't let them find her. Suddenly, someone embraced her from behind, and a familiar voice told the lady not to panic. River's voice held a hint of guilt as he tried to explain that he had no other choice under the circumstances. The protagonist was surprised to see him here. 2 days ago, in Twinvale, the commander of the Dark Knights asked the lady what her plan was. First, Era needed to get her hands on an invitation to the ball. At the Imperial Palace, her aunt didn't want her to go, so the protagonist's goal was to steal the invitation before she could destroy it. And Era also needed to find a chaperone. a high society lady who could accompany her to the event, since officially, Era was not yet married. The crown prince wanted to annul their marriage, not divorce, but for a woman, it was basically the same thing. If Era showed up at the palace ball, everyone would want to stab her in the back and humiliate her. The royal family, her uncle and aunt, no one would stand up for our girl. The stranger had told her that if she wanted to turn the tables, she should go to Mont Tigris and meet Mrs. Chesterfield. Now, Era needed to see for herself if this was true. At that moment, River was urging her to leave quickly, before anyone could find them. Our girl struggled a little, and when their eyes met, the man froze for a second before quickly taking a few steps back. River immediately apologized, explaining that he meant no harm and just wanted to keep them hidden. Era tried to reassure him, as the situation was indeed tricky. Besides, they had dealt with much worse things before, and he was still blushing after all he'd been through. Era, with a wide smile, told the commander that he needed to get used to being touched, as there were rumors they were lovers. He just needed to act like he did back in Twin Vale. Just looking at her made him instantly flush with heat. That day, he had kissed her without a second thought. It was like trying to quench a thirst that water couldn't satisfy, wanting to devour her whole. River felt that was how it was supposed to be. He didn't understand why he lost control every time he was near her, nor could he shake the feeling. Perhaps our hero had come here in search of answers. However, River knew there was no point in dwelling on it, because Mrs. Goldwyn was fascinated by him anyway. He turned around and suggested they should get going. This job was only temporary, and once the contract was over, River could return to the north. The protagonist noticed that Sir River was a bit quiet today. She wondered why the commander was already here. Wasn't he supposed to arrive tomorrow morning? It turned out the man just happened to see Mrs. Goldwyn walking into the woods, so River followed her, thinking she might need his help. The commander asked if the person she was talking about was that man. The protagonist replied that she wasn't sure yet, as she had only seen their backs, but they would find out soon enough. The next day, Era greeted the director. Ellie thanked the lady for her help, and then she mentioned that a distinguished guest had arrived last night, and the ladies might have already heard of him. The butler introduced Sir River Byron. The protagonist said she had seen him from a distance at the victory celebration. She offered a warm smile, greeted the man, and introduced herself. River, a perfect gentleman, kissed Mrs. Goldwyn's hand and returned the introduction. It turned out Sir River was here to support the people from the north. In reality, Era and River had agreed to pretend they didn't know each other, as the rumors hadn't reached Mont Tigris yet. Ellie told the commander that the lady planned to stay for a while and asked how long he intended to stay. River replied that he wanted to check on the patients and would return in a few days, as he had a lot to see here. The director said they would talk after the service and then bid our heroes farewell. Soon, our protagonist saw all the other parishioners who had come for the service. Just like her, she probably hadn't arrived yet. As if sensing something, Era heard faint footsteps behind her and spun around. Finally, our girl found her, the walking textbook of etiquette, Countess Lily Chesterfield. This woman was an idol to countless ladies, the only daughter of Count Chesterfield, and she had been famous for her perfect etiquette since childhood. Every young lady dreamed of having her as their etiquette teacher before entering high society. Before long, even the Empress had heard of her. Lily Chesterfield became our protagonist's etiquette tutor, preparing her for her social debut and her future title as Empress. That was how Era knew her, and now she was seeing her here. Our girl wondered, could that man have been right? Was the Countess really cheating on her husband? But considering the Chesterfield family situation, it wasn't entirely shocking. The Chesterfield family was facing a serious succession problem. The old Count had passed the title to his daughter's fiancé early to ensure she would be secure for the rest of her life. The new Count was head over heels in love with his wife, and people said he was the perfect husband. But after the old Count and his wife died in that accident, everything changed. There were rumors that Count Chesterfield was crazy about his mistress and had even moved her into the house. They even had a child, and now the Count was planning to make him his heir. Lily couldn't believe her husband had just been waiting for a father to die. Upon hearing the news, Countess Chesterfield fainted on the spot. After that, the Countess was never seen in social circles again, and then came the news that she had left the capital entirely. She even refused the Empress's request to be Judith's etiquette teacher, citing illness. But Era didn't understand why she was in Mont Tigris, nor why the Count was keeping it a secret. She had to be careful because the protagonists, Time was running out. As the service ended and people began to leave, Era called out to Countess Chesterfield. She said that if she had known she was in Montigris, she would have come to visit immediately. Lily smiled and greeted Mrs. Goldwyn, saying she hadn't been able to see her yesterday. The woman did look terrible, so maybe she really was sick. The protagonist was glad they had finally met. She asked if she could come by for a chat sometime, and Lily agreed with a smile. The woman was about to say something, but the director interrupted her, noting that the two ladies already knew each other, so she thought she could introduce the rest of the guests. First, Ellie introduced Countess Chesterfield to Sir Byron, and then she introduced Sir River, mentioning he had just returned from the war in the north. Honestly, it was the first time the director had seen the Countess be so friendly to someone, just as she was with Mrs. Goldwyn. The protagonist explained that the Countess had been her etiquette teacher. Thanks to her, the girl's social debut had gone smoothly. Lily added with a warm smile that Mrs. Goldwyn had always been a diligent student, but she was curious and wanted to know what the lady was doing in Montigris these days. The protagonist had an answer ready for that question. She was here to pray, as her father had been in a coma for a full 6 months. It wasn't a complete lie, but the girl had another reason for being in this place. If she helped the people here, maybe God would actually hear her prayers. The protagonist's words deeply moved the two ladies. The Countess took the lady's hand and promised that God would surely hear her prayers. If Era felt lonely, Lily told her she could come to her anytime, and she would be happy to chat. The protagonist sincerely thanked the lady. A few days after that meeting, the Countess began to be less distant with Era. As she had expected, she saw a reflection of herself in the protagonist and decided to open up. Presumably, that conversation was also part of the reason. Era remembered asking the Countess what she had wanted to tell her when the director left. It turned out Lily had heard footsteps in the hallway last night, so she asked if Era had experienced anything similar. But the protagonist smiled and said she hadn't heard anything because she had gone to bed early. The Countess thought she was just overthinking things, so she told the lady to forget about it. After that conversation, the Countess stopped going out at night. The protagonist knew the situation. The woman still didn't trust her, so she had to keep observing. Life in Montigris wasn't as hard as she had imagined. Every morning after service, the protagonist would distribute food to the poor, and after lunch, they would make rounds in the wards to care for the sick. The actual treatment was mostly handled by the priests. She and the Countess just cheered people up or helped out when needed. But the priests were always surprised to see noble women in the wards. They weren't used to nobles taking care of the sick, and you could tell just by the looks on their faces. Ellie called the noble ladies over and blessed them with her divine power. The protagonist immediately felt much lighter. She suggested that the director sew more clothes for the patients, as they would feel better in clean clothes. But Ellie replied that Montigris didn't have the money for that. Then the protagonist promised to make a donation. The director was so happy, she nearly jumped for joy, shouting that Mrs. Goldwyn was a gift from heaven. Era told them that if they needed anything, they should just ask her directly or through her maid. They walked outside, and the protagonist glanced towards the cottage. The nobles all stopped in their tracks when a man emerged from behind the bushes. The protagonist wondered what on earth Father Guesswell was doing there. The director guessed that the man was probably just gathering herbs in the garden. She explained that because they were short on priests and use a lot of them, they grew their own herbs. And Father Guesswell was actually in charge of the herb garden. The director began to bring out one plant after another, explaining which ones helped heal wounds. She specifically highlighted a very dangerous herb that could induce a coma if handled improperly. The protagonist asked if she could see the garden. Outsiders were not allowed in there, but Father Guesswell might make an exception for ladies of noble birth. But the man just said calmly that he had to go, saying he had to deliver medicine to the patients. The director explained that although Father Guesswell was a man of few words, he was a very good person and very devout. That night, Era and River were back hiding in the bushes. The protagonist began to wonder if the Countess would even show up, since she had been coming here every day, and nothing had happened. She decided to ask Sir River if he thought the guy wasn't a priest, but the commander couldn't say for sure. The man asked if the lady was trying to set a trap, which could get her into trouble. But Era countered that if that were the case, she would use it to blackmail her. This response took River by surprise, as he thought she had a special bond with the Countess. That was why our girl had tried to reason with her kindly at first. The commander had to ask, did they really need to hold hands? Every single time. It was too dark for the girl to see how red River's face and ears had become. The protagonist reminded him that they needed to get used to the contact so it wouldn't be awkward in public. Then she brought River's hand closer to her lips. Era said they needed to hold hands with Sir River for the ball, but part of it was also for herself. In the past few days, her headaches had disappeared because she had started holding Sir River's hand frequently, but her head would still start to hurt during the day, so she needed to see him regularly. But our girl just couldn't get him to stay in Montigris. She suddenly decided to offer Sir River some etiquette lessons during his stay. He would be the center of attention at the ball, and every noble would be watching him like a hawk, so the man needed to be prepared. River thanked her for the offer but refused, saying he was a knight. But Era reminded him that he was also the sole heir to the Byron family. During the war with the monsters in the north, Count Byron had lost his entire family, including his sons and his beloved wife. At the knighting ceremony, Sir River was officially recognized as the heir to the Byron family. But that wasn't enough for him to be accepted into high society, as the man still needed to shed his commoner image. He was handsome and a war hero, and there was nothing wrong with River's swordsmanship. All that was left was to fix his rough and untamed aura. According to the history of the Cloak Empire, there was a record of commoner knight who eventually became the prime minister. Usually, that position was reserved for nobles, but this man was so exceptional that even the royal family had to acknowledge him. His descendants founded the Duchy of Cunningham, and now no one dares to look down on them, despite their commoner ancestry. Image is the most powerful weapon in high society. Now, River desperately needed to learn how to act like a nobleman so that no one would dare to humiliate him. But the man didn't know how he could do that in such a short time. The protagonist silenced him by placing a finger on his lips as the best etiquette teacher in the Empire was walking towards the cottage with Father Guesswell. The next day, the tailor, Mrs. Favre, greeted the lady and said it was an honor to work with her. The protagonist returned the greeting. Mrs. Feber brought the clothing design sketches and reminded me that Era had also arranged another job for other tailors, which was to make clothes for the patients. She wanted the clothes to be light, comfortable, breathable, and durable enough to withstand multiple washes. The young lady had also ordered 2 dresses, so Mrs. Feber asked if she intended to wear both. But our heroine said no, because the second dress was for someone else. Era assured the seamstress that she would explain later, and the other party didn't press the matter. Then, our heroine smiled, walked over to the Countess, and greeted her. She asked if she could take a few minutes of her time for a cup of tea. Era explained to the Countess that they had invited tailors to sew patient gowns. Lily told the young lady that thanks to her, the patient's conditions were starting to improve. The heroine thanked her and admitted that she had been very worried about whether she could be of any help. She wasn't sure how long she could stay here, but she wanted to remain and look after everything until Montigris recovered. Lily thought she would be missed here after she left, but Era agreed with the Countess that there were already many volunteers now. Not only Miss Goldwyn, but also Lord River, although he was leaving in 3 days. The Countess took one look at her face and knew the young girl had something on her mind. The heroine confessed in a sad tone that lately, she felt like everything was falling apart. The Countess might not know, but she had recently experienced a real heartbreak. After His Highness the Crown Prince decided to call off the engagement, rumors spread that Miss Goldwyn was an illegitimate daughter, and her father collapsed because of it, falling into a coma. Her uncle temporarily took over the family, but without her father, she could no longer stay there. It was embarrassing to admit, but Era had been lost for a long time. But now, our girl has been invited to the Imperial Ball. The Countess immediately guessed they were talking about Lord River, and Era confirmed it. Just when the young lady was doubting herself, fate brought them together. He invited her to the Imperial Ball, but her aunt was strongly against it. However, Era ultimately felt it was her own fault, and that perhaps it would have been better not to know anything in the first place. Alas, if only I could go back to before all this happened. Maybe I could have really changed something, but that's impossible now. The Countess thought to herself that the young lady had grown a lot, although in her eyes, she was still a child. Lily decided to offer the young lady her help. A surprised expression appeared on the heroine's face, as she couldn't believe her plan had succeeded so easily. Era admitted that before coming to Montigris, she was very anxious, feeling she was asking for too much. But it seemed God had taken pity on her and led her to the Countess. So if the lady could become her guardian, she could go to the Imperial Ball with Lord River. Era felt this surely wouldn't be enough, as the Countess had even refused the Empress. But surprisingly, Lily agreed, saying she was also considering a return to high society. The heroine couldn't believe the lady had actually agreed, because she had even refused the Empress. Era had no idea that this was the first time Lily was hearing about it. The Countess had another reason to return to high society as soon as possible. She insisted that the young lady take her to see the Empress, as that would give her a reason to attend the ball. Era didn't know all the details, but it seemed the Countess was in a difficult situation. Therefore, whoever told her about Montagres must have known the inside story, or things wouldn't have gone so smoothly. The heroine asked the lady if they could meet again later that evening to be measured for the dresses. Era requested that the future gown designed by Mrs. Feber should match Lord River's image. This way, the rumors surrounding her wouldn't tarnish his heroic, pure, and noble reputation. Mrs. Feber understood completely and began taking Countess Chesterfield's measurements. Once everything was ready, the head seamstress assured Miss Goldwyn that she would be notified as soon as the sketches were finished. With the dress matter settled, Lily asked what the schedule was for the rest of the day. For the rest of the time, our heroine planned to teach Lord River social etiquette to prevent him from embarrassing himself. To do this, she had to meet him in secret, away from her uncle's prying eyes. The Countess told the young lady not to worry, as she was more than willing to help her with this problem. The next day, Lily had Ellie use a period of continuous prayer as a cover to quell the gossip. Since it was a request from Miss Goldwyn, the butler agreed to the idea. It seemed things were finally starting to get on track. Time flew by, and the day of River's scheduled departure from Montagres finally arrived. Fortunately, our girl managed to slip out without being discovered. What she couldn't figure out was how she, River, Countess Lily, and Father Jeswell had ended up in this strange group. At that moment, Casper was playing the role of Miss Goldwyn, just hoping the real lady would return quickly. Anton reported to Baron Ethis that the young lady had entered a period of continuous prayer. During this time, people barely eat or sleep, which can easily wear down the body. So if the girl suddenly fainted, no one would be suspicious. The Baron told Angelsea that he would soon be heading to Montagres to support Era and help treat the patients. The therapist accepted his master's orders. Era might be weak from constant prayer, so he needed to prescribe her some supplements to restore her strength. Meanwhile, River told his father that they had found people from the war-torn north in Montagres. They were in urgent need of help. The Count had received the report, but he still couldn't figure out how these uninvited guests had appeared. River told him that he had met Countess Chesterfield in Montagres and that she wanted to teach him etiquette. The heroine personally explained to the Count that Countess Chesterfield needed help. They needed to practice dancing for the ball, but her health prevented her from being a suitable partner. Because the Countess was concerned about her health, the temple had sent Father Jeswell to accompany them. Rose Byron told them in a weary voice to make sure this matter didn't cause any gossip. He had the butler show the guests to their rooms. Everyone left, and now only River and the Count remained. Rose asked his son what this was all about, as he had never said he wanted to go to Montagres to see Miss Goldwyn. He had seemed uninterested in women before, but suddenly he invited Miss Goldwyn, so there must be a reason. Although the Count didn't know the full story, he warned River that getting involved with Miss Goldwyn would not be good for his reputation. However, River was determined to prove to his father that this deal was a sure thing. He quickly showed the deposit he had received from the young lady and explained that she would provide more funds if the deal was successful. Furthermore, the young lady had also promised to send supplies to the north. The Count said it was too much money for a simple transaction and could cause them big trouble in the long run. But River reminded him that the victory reward promised by His Majesty had yet to be delivered. Even if it were, that money wouldn't be enough to cover all the needs of the North. And River had no intention of sitting by and watching the North decline. Since the Count had taken him in, he was now a member of the Byron family, which meant he had a duty to protect the North. But River would do it his own way. After saying this, the man bowed and took his leave. What His Majesty had feared had happened after all. River and Miss Goldwyn had met. When fate is pulling the strings, you can't avoid someone. Soon, the first dance lesson began. River kept wondering why his father had looked so panicked at that moment. He had just lost focus for a moment and ended up stepping right on the lady's dress. He immediately apologized, but Era told him to relax. Seeing that everyone was still a mess, the Countess announced a short break and left the room. Era looked a bit impatient and asked Lord River why he was so nervous. In the eyes of others, they had to look like a couple in love. The heroine walked up to him and said that even the Countess had decided to leave them alone. River pushed the young lady away, saying he never expected the Countess to support her plan, but now he was curious how she had managed it. The heroine remembered pouring her heart out to the Countess and immediately blushed. Seeing the young lady's silence, River even started to get worried. The heroine shyly asked him not to ask, as she felt a bit embarrassed thinking back on it. But now the man was even more interested in what she had said. Era took a step back, but accidentally stepped on her own dress. She immediately felt herself losing balance, so she squeezed her eyes shut, preparing to fall. But Lord River steadily caught her by the waist. Their eyes met, and both of their hearts began to pound wildly. The man asked the young lady if she was all right. The heroine said she was fine, and just then, Countess Chesterfield returned to the room. Era immediately pulled away from River as if she had been burned. Lily immediately noticed the awkward atmosphere between the young couple. Since they were well rested, the Countess suggested they continue their training. All right, now you need to naturally take each other's hands and gaze into each other's eyes. Lord River, you step forward with your left foot, and Miss Era, you step back with your right. At first, Era thought it was just nerves and that she would be fine, but her heart still wouldn't calm down. From that day on, the young couple agreed to practice every other day. Under the pretext of supporting the northern residents in Montagras, the Count's domain would send a carriage. During Era's stay at the Count Byron estate, Mrs. Feber came to prepare Lord River's attire. The Countess guessed that the young lady was now nervous about the ball, but she told her not to worry too much, as Lord River would adapt faster than she thought. It seemed he was practically born for high society, which made our heroine very happy. After dancing at the ball, he should also become familiar with other high society traditions. Era's worries were unnecessary, as everything was going smoothly now. They finally arrived at Montagras. Our heroine caught a glimpse of her family's doctor with a priest out the window, and her eyes widened in surprise. Angel C said he had to see Miss Goldwyn, saying she had a chronic illness and needed her medicine, and that the Baron was frantic. But the nun told him that the young lady was currently in a period of continuous prayer, and not even a priest could approach her at such a time, so there was nothing she could do. Just then, the doctor started rummaging through his bag. He took out a small vial and pleaded with her to at least take this medicine to the young lady while he examined the patients here. Angel C just couldn't stop worrying about the young lady. The nun agreed to deliver the medicine. Then she opened the gate to let the doctor in. The man walked straight inside, and the gate slammed shut. As soon as they arrived, the heroine immediately jumped out of the carriage. Casper was hiding in her room, praying nonstop. She was overjoyed when the door was suddenly pushed open and Miss Goldwyn stood there calling for her. Era was worried about her maid, but the girl said she was fine, saying she was strong. The heroine promised that from now on, she would only leave every other day, and they would take turns praying. Then she whispered that Angel C was currently in Montagras, and Casper was stunned by the news. Era told her to be extra careful, as she might run into him on the street. To be honest, she had thought the continuous prayer would put her uncle's mind at ease, but now it seemed he had other plans. Maybe he was doing this deliberately to keep an eye on her. Era didn't know what her uncle was plotting, so she needed to be fully prepared. It was likely she didn't have much time left. She had to find evidence of her uncle's deep-seated corruption as soon as possible. To do that, she needed someone who could help her both inside and outside the estate. Joseph immediately came to her mind. Basically, the heroine was thinking of the former butler, the one who used to serve the Goldwyn family. Era asked Casper where she should go to find him. The girl thought for a moment, then said that people usually go to experienced information brokers for such things, and she had heard they operated in Twinville. Casper then realized she had let it slip, but the heroine took note of the information and assured her maid that she would be very careful this time. Joseph had served the Goldwyn family since the time of the previous duke. He was not only loyal, but also extremely competent, so the estate was well organized under his management. But when Era returned to the capital, Joseph had disappeared, and a man named Giles had taken his place. So the heroine went to her uncle, who told her that the old butler had embezzled the family's money. Era couldn't believe what she was hearing. Despite what her uncle said, the stolen money was never found. She couldn't investigate at the time, but now she began to wonder where that money had gone. If she hadn't left for her own territory, she could have prevented Joseph from being fired. Suddenly, a man's voice next to Era asked what she was spacing out about. The stranger kissed her hand and said he knew she would come crawling back to him. The man led the heroine into his office. As soon as he took off his mask, Era recognized him immediately. It was Duke Frederick Lindman, who smiled and told her to sit down. Era was sure he had the wrong person and that they weren't well acquainted, but Frederick leaned in and said he was definitely not mistaken. The heroine froze as he suddenly pulled the hood from her head. Meanwhile, the Duke revealed that she was able to meet Countess Chesterfield, all thanks to him. He wondered if she was really pretending not to remember. The heroine couldn't believe that this was the person who had told her where Countess Chesterfield was hiding. She didn't know why the Duke had helped her, but told him not to assume they were close just because of one night. Era was stunned when he said it was far more than one night. The heroine was confused. Had they met before? Frederick leaned over and asked the young lady how many times she thought they had had a tryst. Fragments of memories flashed through Era's mind, and she clutched her head. The man asked if she was feeling all right. Era said she was fine and explained that she had come to ask him to find someone important. She was talking about the former butler of the Goldwyn family, a man named Joseph. She asked how long the search would take. Frederick suddenly said, "Get ready, my lady. We're leaving now." In a flash, the carriage had arrived. The heroine couldn't believe there was a place like this in the capital, full of thugs and poor people. The girl began to wonder if Joseph was really here, but her eyes widened when one of the ruffians shouted, "We need money." In an alley, 3 robbers were beating a poor old man, brandishing their blades. The heroine immediately demanded they stop the carriage, because she had found Joseph. But Frederick grabbed her arm, warning, "If you go out now, you'll regret it later." Deeply. The heroine didn't listen to the Duke and rushed to help Joseph anyway. Era walked straight up to the thugs and demanded to know what they were doing. If they needed money, she was willing to give it to them as long as the scoundrels went away. But instead, they turned their attention to the heroine, thinking they could get more out of her. Era immediately shouted that if they dared to lay a finger on her, they would regret it. In an instant, a sword was at one of the thugs' throats. Frederick reminded the heroine that he had warned her she would regret her actions. The thugs immediately came to their senses and demanded to know who he was. The next second, the heroine watched as a bloody massacre unfolded before her eyes. The Duke dealt with all the scum without breaking a sweat. The heroine rushed straight to Joseph. With tears in her eyes, she began to apologize to the former butler for taking so long to come see him. But unexpectedly, Joseph told her he was fine and that the young lady shouldn't worry so much. He apologized to her and then walked away. Sitting in the carriage, she kept asking herself why Joseph had refused her help. These thoughts brought on another headache. Frederick noticed and asked if it was happening again. The man knew too much about Era, and she didn't want to show weakness, so she just said she was fine. The heroine asked the Duke not to tell anyone what happened today. Era also asked him to forget her request and where she had been as part of their deal. As soon as the carriage stopped, Frederick reminded the young lady that she could always count on him. The heroine didn't even acknowledge him and went straight to her room. Casper greeted her at the door and immediately noticed something was wrong. Miss Era asked for a painkiller, and without hesitation, the maid pulled a small vial from her pocket, the same one the priest had given her. Era swallowed a pill without a second thought, while Casper poured a glass of water. She handed the glass to her mistress, who thanked her. The heroine immediately swallowed the pill. Casper suggested her mistress rest here for a while, as it would be difficult to walk back to her room now. Then the maid left the room. The heroine immediately felt very nauseous and dizzy. The symptoms worsened with each passing second, and she slowly slid to the floor. A short while later, Casper returned to the room. She was horrified to see her mistress lying unconscious on the floor. The priest who arrived quickly administered first aid to the heroine. But the young lady didn't wake up, and the supervisor thought it was more than just simple fatigue. She asked if the lady had eaten anything strange, and Casper remembered she had taken a painkiller. Father Gieswell asked to see the pills, and he immediately identified poison in them. This couldn't be, as it was the medicine the Goldwyn family's private doctor had given the maid. He couldn't have done this alone, so Casper immediately knew Baron Anton was also involved. They immediately reassured her, saying the young lady would surely recover. Baron Anton soon reported to Baron Ethis that the young lady had collapsed after taking the medicine. The therapist hadn't seen it himself, but he noticed how agitated the priests had become. Since Era had collapsed due to excessive prayer, the Baron should now receive compensation from the temple. Soon, young Lord River also received news from Montagras in the form of a letter. The letter reported on Miss Goldwyn's current condition. River immediately told his subordinate to continue training while he rushed off on an urgent matter. On his way to Montagras, he was overwhelmed by a mix of anxiety, despair, and hope. He burst straight into the lady's room without any courtesy. The Countess suggested the supervisor leave the two alone, and Ellie didn't argue. Until now, River couldn't believe the young lady had actually collapsed, which was why he had rushed straight to Montagras. Seeing her lying there unconscious, he was terrified of losing her and finally realized he had been smitten from the very beginning. And so, he began to plead for the young lady to wake up. Suddenly, Ira's body began to glow with a bright, golden light. A few weeks later, the Imperial Ball finally arrived. Lord River Byron and Miss Era Goldwyn were announced as guests. Then, Countess Lily Chesterfield was also announced. The lady immediately walked over to the couple to greet them. The ladies thought Miss Goldwyn had chosen this newcomer as her partner just to provoke Countess Chesterfield. As the center of attention, their pairing undoubtedly drew everyone's eyes. But she told River to go in first, as the stares from her relatives felt like they were trying to kill her. After Lord Byron pleaded for weeks, our girl finally opened her eyes. The guy immediately started asking if she felt any pain since she had been in a coma all this time. To be safe, he decided to call for a few priests and Lady Chesterfield. She immediately felt much lighter, but Sir River was still looking at her, with a worried look on his face. The last thing Era remembered was swallowing a headache pill in the chapel, and then nothing. Soon, the room was crowded with people, and the Countess of Chesterfield explained that she had been searching for a suitable antidote. Era tearfully asked Casper if the pills were really poisoned. The girl said that Mr. Angelsea had given her the medicine, and she never thought something like this would happen. Angelsea definitely couldn't have done this alone, so Era guessed it was her uncle's order. River walked into the room carrying a tray. Ellie immediately went up and asked him how the young lady could have woken up so quickly after being so strongly poisoned. The man explained that he was just holding the young lady's hand when her body suddenly emitted a golden glow. He then placed the tray on a chair and told the young lady he had brought water especially for her. The ball was less than 2 weeks away, and they weren't ready yet. River was willing to train, but he knew the young lady needed to rest now. But she felt great. The protagonist started to get out of bed and suggested to Sir River that they go to the training hall immediately. No one tried to dissuade the young lady, and River just followed her silently. A few days later, Baron Ethus Anton arrived in Montagros. He was glad that Era had voluntarily chosen to stay in this godforsaken place to help this rabble. But now he needed to punish the ones who had pushed her into this situation in the first place. A priest was waiting at the door to greet him. He led the Baron into the living room and asked him to wait a moment, saying the priest would be right there. The wait wasn't long, and before he knew it, another person walked into the room. The Baron's eyes widened in shock. Standing at the door was the fully recovered protagonist, who greeted her uncle with a smile. She wondered why he was so pale, as if he had seen a ghost. Ethus couldn't figure it out and began to suspect that Anglesey had betrayed him. But since Era was fine, he felt he could just let things be. However, the protagonist decided to tell her uncle that she was going to the upcoming royal ball. The Baron couldn't explicitly forbid his niece from going. Still, he decided to tell her that she had never actually received an invitation from the royal family. But Era told her uncle not to worry, because she already had a plan on how to make it happen. To be honest, Ethus thought the silly girl would stay quietly at home, but for some reason, she had suddenly decided to go to the ball. There was one thing the guy was sure of: he would definitely humiliate her in public. In front of everyone, the Anton family was angry, so the eldest son decided to talk to his cousin himself. So he walked straight toward Era. The protagonist impatiently asked him what he wanted with her. Lionel was stunned when the feisty girl told him to just say what he had to say and not waste her time. The hero told her that she had broken her promise because she was supposed to stay in Montigra until the end of the social season, but instead she had shamed the family again. But Era calmly explained that her aunt had only suggested she spend the rest of the season in Montegra, but she couldn't stay put because she was too restless. Era didn't understand why she had to listen to her cousin's ranting, as she hadn't broken any promises. Lionel lost control and started shouting that she wasn't even invited to the ball. Instead, she showed up with a commoner knight and Lady Chesterfield, who had abandoned her husband and child. Era couldn't tolerate insults against her friends, so she ordered Lionel to apologize to them immediately. Baron Anton intervened to smooth things over, apologizing for his foolish son's behavior. He asked everyone to ignore Lionel's words and not take them to heart. But now the Baron was planning to have a serious man-to-man talk with Lionel after returning to the estate. River leaned closer to the young lady and asked if she had provoked her cousin on purpose. The other ladies began to whisper that Miss Goldwyn was completely different from the rumors. She was actually quite shrewd. The music started, which meant it was time for all the partners to dance. Era glanced at the Crown Prince and noticed a smile on his face that she had never seen when they were together. For some reason, she started thinking about that day again. Suddenly, River reached out and touched the young lady's hand. In that instant, the protagonist felt a wave of calm wash over her. She grabbed the guy's hand and asked him to dance with her. River was a little nervous, but Era calmed him down, reminding him that they had practiced for this many times. He nodded in agreement. The guy carefully placed his hand on the young lady's waist, and they began to twirl to the music. The protagonist thanked Lord Byron for his help. River looked at her in confusion, and Era explained that she was referring to when he held her hand just a few minutes ago. For some reason, holding River's hand calmed her down, and her headache disappeared. The dark-haired man was very happy to hear this. Era asked if the stairs bothered him, and River said he was used to them by now. All the guests at the ball were very impressed by the pair. After this, River would be flooded with letters from fans, and he would have to personally reply to most of them, or his reputation would plummet. The protagonist made the right choice in picking Sir River. I mean, the guy is handsome and noble, and all eyes were glued to him. But she couldn't rely on him alone, which meant Era needed to find new allies this social season. The Emperor and Empress were watching the ball. You could see the longing and sadness in Servian's eyes. She was watching Miss Goldwyn and Lord Byron, who were clearly enjoying each other's company. Liam asked his wife if she was still worried about the Crown Princess. She had spent so long looking for an etiquette teacher, so the Emperor came to this conclusion after observing her. The truth was, she was worried she would mess up, as this was her first appearance as the Crown Princess. However, it seemed she was wrong. The Emperor thought that the etiquette teacher didn't necessarily have to be the Countess of Chesterfield. Still, Liam never thought that after refusing the Empress, the Countess would appear here as Miss Goldwyn's guardian. The Empress said the Countess was in poor health, and Miss Goldwyn already knew etiquette, so she just needed someone to accompany her. Liam found himself thinking that his wife always took care of Miss Goldwyn as if she were made of glass. Servian gave him a sad smile and said that was true. The fact was, she was worried Era wouldn't be able to cope, but now it seemed she had recovered. Or maybe she was just putting on a good act. After the ball, the Countess asked the young lady if she planned to return to the Goldwyn estate. But the protagonist said she was more comfortable here and then asked for the lady's opinion. Before Lily could answer, the housekeeper of the Mont Grass Manor walked over. Ellie walked up to the young lady very politely and asked her to step aside for a brief conversation. The Countess said she would return to her room then, and the head maid showed the young lady the way. Following Ellie, the blonde wondered if something was wrong in Montague's again. Maybe the head maid was going to ask her for money again. Ellie led the protagonist to her room, and Era immediately asked if something urgent had happened. The head maid said everything was fine. She just wanted to ask something. This might sound a bit abrupt, but Ellie asked if the young lady suffered from headaches or insomnia. The protagonist froze, thinking, how did she know? She always hid her pain, and since coming here, Sir River had saved her from severe headaches. Era didn't answer and just asked her why she was asking. My lady, I'm very sorry if I've offended you. It's just that something has been bothering me. Whatever it was, our girl knew very well that she couldn't reveal her condition to Ellie. Era said she felt a little unwell after her father fell ill, but it passed quickly, and she was completely fine now. The housekeeper admitted sheepishly that she was just a little worried because she had heard the young lady wasn't in good health. In that case, Ellie could leave. But our girl still couldn't figure out how she knew about her health problems. It was probably Baron Anton pulling strings behind the scenes. A few days later, the protagonist received an absurd number of invitations to various events. Casper noticed that the young lady had been sleeping like a baby lately and looked much better. Although Era hadn't seen Sir River since the ball, she really hadn't had any more headaches. If things continued like this, she wouldn't need to see him so often. But for some reason, the protagonist didn't want that. Era was curious how Lady Chesterfield would react to those letters, as she was probably in her room right now. Suddenly, Casper revealed that the lady had left Montargis this morning. It turned out that the Earl of Chesterfield was in a hurry to see her. He had supposedly not contacted her once since she arrived in Montargis, but now he did so suddenly. Era knew very well what it was like to be in a house with no support, so she hoped for the best. The Countess sat in her carriage, rereading the letter over and over. It said that the Earl of Chesterfield had seen her at the ball, which meant she had recovered and could come home soon. The Countess told the coachman to slow down. She said she needed to take a break, as she got motion sickness from not traveling for a long time. Even so, the lady appeared at the Chesterfield estate. Soon, the housekeeper greeted her. Lily clutched her dress and told herself not to be afraid, because she was about to see him. The maids started whispering as soon as they saw the Countess of Chesterfield. Another woman came out to greet Lily. She was Vera Blackwood, the Earl of Chesterfield's current mistress. Vera had of course heard that the Earl had invited her, but she hadn't expected the Countess to actually come, so she was unprepared for this. Lily coldly asked where the Earl was. The mistress glanced at a maid and told her to take the lady to him. Vera had likely taken over the mansion while the Countess was away. Of course, this part was her own fault for running away like a coward. A maid knocked on the door of his lordship the Earl of Chesterfield's study and announced that the Countess of Chesterfield had arrived. The Earl greeted the lady with a smile. She must have come straight over after receiving his letter this morning, which meant she had accepted his offer. He had already thought everything through. Vera was having a hard time without the Countess to do all the housework. The Earl promised to have Lily's bedroom prepared, but the Countess suddenly refused. He had clearly misunderstood the reason for her visit, as Lily had not come back to live with him as before. She was the rightful heir to the Chesterfield family, and he had only gotten the title by marrying her. The Earl reached for her shoulder, but she pushed his hand away, showing that she was serious this time. Now Lily was going to correct that mistake and take back her title. In other words, they were officially over. A few days later, at another tea party, the ladies were buzzing about the latest gossip. The Countess of Chesterfield had filed for divorce. Since a title was involved, the divorce proceedings were sure to be messy. The girls decided to ask Miss Goldwyn if she knew any details, since she was with the Countess at the ball. But our girl just smiled and said that she and the Countess weren't that close. To be honest, she was surprised too, because she always thought Lily was timid, but if she was having an affair and filing for divorce, it seemed that wasn't the case. The high society lady admitted she was surprised, not only that Miss Era came to the ball with the Countess, but also by her escort for the evening. The lady with pink hair wondered if they had met at Twin Whale. The protagonist nodded, thinking it should be common knowledge by now. Sir River and the Countess of Chesterfield were her benefactors who helped her when she was at a low point in her life. After meeting in Twinville, she had kept in touch with Lord Byron. The protagonist asked the lady, a little shyly, if she had ever had that feeling, like fate was pulling you together. The pink-haired lady grew curious and suggested they go to the ball together. The protagonist replied that it was Sir River's suggestion. River said she hadn't been out in a long time, so he would accompany her so she wouldn't have to worry. Lord Byron agreed, though he was a little nervous as it was his first ball. Suddenly, Era realized she was rambling on about him and felt a little embarrassed. The protagonist was glad she went to Lady Richmond's party. She was close to the Goldwyn family and loved to gossip, so she would definitely spread the word about her and River. Era was showing off a little, but she had to keep up appearances. It was the only way for her to return to high society, and her uncle wouldn't be able to touch her anymore. It seemed our girl's headache was back. After the coma, she had been feeling fine on her own, even without Sir River, so she had let her guard down. But now she had to go see him right away. Later, in the training grounds of the Byron estate, Sir River was completely unable to focus on his training. He couldn't stop thinking about Miss Goldwyn, her beautiful eyes and charming smile. River started hallucinating that she was there, and when he heard her voice, he thought he had gone completely mad. The protagonist asked, very surprised, what he meant by that. River was startled and cried out. He was going crazy, wondering if this was real and not just his imagination. Era thought the guy looked dejected, as if he hadn't expected to see her here. River quickly replied that he was just surprised by her visit. She laughed and said she was just teasing him. The protagonist moved closer and said she needed some help, asking River to spare some time for her. The guy's face turned red again. He immediately turned around and suggested they go inside. The two went to the living room, and soon a maid brought fragrant tea and placed it on the table. The protagonist thanked the maid and asked her to leave them alone with Sir River. The guy guessed that the favor she wanted to ask was something she didn't want others to know about. Unexpectedly, the girl said no. She just knew that Sir River would be more comfortable without anyone else around. The young lady took a sip of tea and asked if he had chosen it himself. But Sir River admitted awkwardly that he actually knew nothing about tea. The protagonist thought the tea suited him very well. If he had other guests, Era suggested serving them this tea. Sir River then asked what the young lady wanted to talk to him about. The protagonist explained that she had received a ton of invitations after the royal ball, but some parties required an escort, so Era decided to ask Sir River to accompany her. The young lady had no special requests. She just wanted River to pretend to be her lover, just like before. Of course, Era promised to repay him, as their deal wasn't over yet. Little did she know, River would have done it even without payment. So he agreed to her request. Soon, every newspaper was buzzing about Miss Goldwyn and the Commoner Knight, who were constantly seen on dates. People began to think that the infamous young lady was trying to claw her way back into high society. There were even headlines saying they were secretly engaged. Everything was going according to the protagonist's plan, although the engagement rumors were a bit much. Suddenly, Casper burst into the room. She showed the young lady today's newspaper and said in a panic that something terrible had happened. It turned out the paper was spouting nonsense about the Countess of Chesterfield's secret rendezvous. Casper had no idea where these rumors came from. The protagonist realized her maid was in the dark, which was why she was so shocked. Era asked if the lady already knew, but Casper said she didn't know and hadn't seen her in a long time. The protagonist wondered if this was all a setup by the Earl of Chesterfield, who had known everything from the beginning. If the lady was in trouble, Era was done for too. But she immediately chided herself for being selfish. It was best not to tell the Countess anything for now. So the protagonist told Casper to keep it a secret as well. The maid nodded, and the protagonist dismissed her. A short while later, Era attended another event with River. The nobles were already buzzing about the latest gossip. The protagonist decided to ask her companion if he had heard about the recent scandal. The guy replied that it was hard to miss something like that, but he didn't understand what the big deal was. As far as River knew, the Earl of Chesterfield also had a mistress, so why was everyone blaming the Countess? This surprised Era, but she replied that it was normal for aristocratic men to have mistresses. For example, if there were no children in the marriage, the law didn't forbid them from having lovers. But if a married woman got involved with another man, it was considered a crime. In that case, River didn't understand why the lady would do it, knowing the consequences. He caught himself and quickly added that he wasn't blaming her, just curious why the Countess of Chesterfield would do such a thing. Era smiled mysteriously and said that Sir River was absolutely right. She had only thought about enduring the scandal before, but maybe there was another way to play this. As soon as night fell, the girl went to see Lady Lily. Lily immediately opened the door and let Miss Goldwyn in. The protagonist was completely caught off guard by her sickly appearance. She hadn't expected this. Era asked if the lady had eaten, and Lily said she had no appetite at all. The lady added that the young lady herself knew what people were saying about her. The Countess of Chesterfield felt it was all her fault. She confessed that she had been secretly meeting another man behind everyone's back. But the protagonist told her not to say that, because the Earl of Chesterfield had cheated first. "I know this is presumptuous," Era said, "but I want to repay you for everything you've done for me." So this was the situation. Lily had filed for divorce, but the Earl refused to sign the papers. The Countess's eyes widened when Era asked, "What if we make him agree?" Miss Goldwyn just smirked and said, "Let's make him an offer he can't refuse." A few days later, in Twinvale, one of the men noticed his boss was in an unusually good mood today. Frederick grinned. "Finally got a reply from my dear wife, after waiting for so long." The maid led the young lady to the study and announced, "The Duke is waiting for you." Then she opened the door and let her in. Frederick greeted his wife with a smile. "We finally meet again, huh?" Duke Linman knew at once that the young lady needed his help again, and she nodded, ready to tell him everything. But Frederick told her to wait, saying he wanted to guess first. It could be news about Joseph or something about Baron Anton. She was surprised when he finally mentioned intelligence on the Earl of Chesterfield's weakness. Era was interested in all of it, but right now, Chesterfield's weakness was the most important. Frederick asked if she had decided to help his wife instead of using the information to blackmail the Countess. Anyone else would have done that, but Era couldn't do that to the lady. The Duke said he didn't know much about the Earl of Chesterfield, so he would send an invitation when he had more information. The protagonist wondered if she really needed to come in person. It wasn't necessary, but Frederick just felt like seeing her again on a whim. These words didn't move the protagonist at all. She sighed deeply and said that in that case, they would see each other next time. After the young lady left, Frederick laughed, saying she was as cold as ever. He actually quite liked it, though. His subordinate returned to the room and told his master that someone had come to talk about an investment. Frederick impatiently reminded him that he had already told him to refuse politely. The guy had actually tried, but for some reason, he couldn't do it. The Duke couldn't believe this guy had the nerve to just show up. The coachman asked Mrs. Goldwyn if she was returning to Montgrass or had other business. She reluctantly requested to go to the Goldwyn Manor. Our heroine hated that place, but she was in desperate need of money right now, because she had to pay Sir River. As soon as she stepped into the manor, the housekeeper immediately greeted her. Merlin nervously asked why she had come without any prior notice. She said she was just there to pick up some things, only to find that her uncle and aunt were not home at all. This news made Era very happy. The housekeeper awkwardly asked how she was feeling, as she had fainted before. Our heroine smiled and said she was fine now. Merlin didn't expect the lady to ask how she was in return, because she herself looked terrible. The lady just said she was a little tired and there was nothing to worry about. Era told her that if her uncle was bullying her, she must speak up, but Merlin insisted that everything was fine. But the lady assured her that the Baron was treating her well. The heroine nodded and said she was going back to her room. Shortly after, Era left the family manor, but just then, her uncle and aunt happened to return. The Baron and Baroness immediately noticed the carriage parked near the manor. They were very surprised to see Era carrying a suitcase. Marcella was visibly annoyed and asked what the girl was doing here, since she hadn't informed them in advance. This was a bit rude. After all, a lady can do anything here when the masters are not at home. The heroine retorted that the Baroness spoke as if the house were hers. Marcella didn't expect such a response. Her uncle interjected that his wife was just surprised by her sudden visit and blurted out something foolish. Era replied that it was no big deal, since her uncle was only managing the estate. For now, the heroine was about to leave, but the Baroness stopped her. She furiously asked what Era was planning to take, as she had already squandered a large amount of jewelry. If this continued, Era would bankrupt the entire Goldwyn family, so we must control her spending. Edith Anton also chimed in. Before they talked about extravagance, maybe they should look in the mirror, living their own luxurious lives and spending money on trinkets. But Era couldn't afford to annoy them now, so she'd better keep her mouth shut. So the heroine promised that from now on, she would ask for her uncle's permission before using the family funds. She bid her relatives farewell and promised to give notice before her next visit. Edith Anton had no idea what Era was planning. She used to be so quiet and obedient, but now she was clearly hiding something. The man recalled that before his brother passed away, he had tried to contact Earl Byron. He needed to investigate this further, but first, he had to keep Era in line. The Baron took a business card from his dressing table. It had been a while since he had visited the head of the Lumiere Company, and it was time for a visit. A few days later, Era read about a pending scandal involving an illegitimate child. She threw the newspaper aside, deciding not to read such trash anymore. All this time, Era thought she was in control of everything, but now it seemed to be the opposite. She tried to calm herself down, thinking that once she sorted things out, these rumors would disappear. Frederick offered her information on the Earl of Chesterfield. The intelligence was very detailed, including even minor things, so he offered to make a summary, but she politely declined. The Duke nodded in approval, saying you never know what might be useful, so it's best to read and memorize everything. It turned out Frederick's offer to give her a brief overview was just a joke, but then he noted that the lady might need another favor, as a certain newspaper had been writing malicious articles about her. Era just told him to ignore it. It was most likely her uncle behind it, so if she intervened, things could get worse. Frederick told the lady to let him know if she couldn't stand it anymore. He hated seeing his mistress so upset. The heroine revealed that she didn't plan to sit back and do nothing. She already had a plan, and her goal was to take back everything that was rightfully hers. To do that, Era might have to deal with her own uncle. The Duke was surprised to learn that the lady had been trying to meet with the Baron's people. But no one would meet her, not even Lionel's friend Anton or the Crown Princess's people, which wasn't surprising. Lionel was being oppressed by the Baron, and the Crown Princess's people were too afraid to provoke Mrs. Goldwyn. Era was indeed in a tough spot right now. The heroine asked him how much she should pay for the information, but the Duke wouldn't take a penny. This was wonderful, especially since Era had been short on cash lately. She said she couldn't spend a single penny without her uncle's permission. Before she left, Frederick told her she could always come to him if she needed help. He could find a way to help her without arousing any suspicion. The heroine thanked the Duke, but said she could handle everything herself. If you rely on others too much, you'll end up unable to live without them. She left, and Frederick's expression darkened. Casper was shocked to hear that her mistress had obtained information on the Earl of Chesterfield. The heroine said she had dug up that much dirt in Twinville. This shocked the maid even more. Casper knew very well that information from Twinville was very expensive, so she asked her mistress how much it cost. Era replied with a smug smile that she hadn't spent a penny. It seemed she had simply caught the attention of Twinville's owner. Casper excitedly asked if her mistress had found out who the real owner of Twinville was. It was only now that Era realized no one knew this information, and Frederick probably didn't want to reveal it. Even if the heroine told someone now, no one would believe her anyway. The Earl's image was flawless. He had no business troubles and no feuds with anyone. But suddenly, the heroine noticed a piece of paper with a folded corner. The girl pulled it out and began to study it. It mentioned suspicious transactions related to charity dinner money, as well as information about the manor's staff. So Era now knew the Earl of Chesterfield's weakness. All of this had to be saved no matter what. But just then, with a thud, another severe headache hit our heroine. Casper was terrified when her mistress suddenly bent over and let out a low groan of pain. This had never happened before, so she didn't know why she suddenly felt so awful. The maid suggested calling a priest, but Era refused. She decided to go directly to Sir River first thing the next morning, and she did just that. The next day, it turned out our heroine hadn't slept a wink. Era felt awkward about only seeking this guy's help when she needed it. But hey, that was the deal. She had to pull herself together. Everything would be fine. However, instead of Sir River, the Countess met with Earl Rose Byron. The gentleman explained that his son was not at the manor at the moment, so he would receive her instead. Era dejectedly apologized for bothering him. She was about to leave, but the Earl asked her to stay for a cup of tea. Our heroine, of course, couldn't refuse. She asked if the Earl had something he wanted to say to her. It seemed Rose had heard that the lady had been looking for River lately. Of course, even though he had been accepted into high society, his duty was still to be a knight guarding the north. My lady, you must understand, he can't stay in the capital and play house with you forever, Era. She bluntly asked if the Earl was angry, because she seemed to be using Sir River. But the gentleman didn't think so at all. In fact, he thought River needed to be used. In a way, the heroine was confused. Did the Earl know what she was trying to do? But Rose thought this approach was a bit messy, as it was more about salvaging her reputation. The Earl didn't believe that constantly being in the spotlight was really of any benefit to River. The heroine tried to explain, but a sudden pang of pain made her freeze. Rose noticed the change in the lady, who suddenly asked what on earth she was supposed to do. Everywhere she went, there was only suspicion and side eyes, making it impossible for her to think straight. The blonde had simply chosen a method that would yield immediate results. Realizing what she had done, Era immediately apologized, saying she had been very on edge lately. Earl Byron suddenly revealed that the Duke of Goldwyn had tried to contact him before he collapsed. Rose had something he wanted to tell him, but never got the chance. He desperately wanted to deliver the message, so he pleaded with the lady to protect the Duke of Goldwyn's family. So Earl Byron and the heroine's father knew each other. Era promised she would definitely protect her father and help deliver the unspoken words. But if the Earl began to trust her, he could tell her himself when he was ready. Rose hoped that day would come soon. Shortly after, the heroine returned to Montgrass. Casper ran out to greet her. The maid asked if Sir River had returned, and Era said he had been away all day, so she just left. Casper learned that the lady was having severe headaches again. She decided to tell the priest so they could at least give her some medicine, but the heroine said not to bother. Suddenly, a man appeared before the girls. It was Priest Guesswell, who had just returned from the herb garden. Casper didn't hesitate to ask him if he had any herbs for headaches. It seemed the lady's headaches were very severe. Guesswell told the lady to stay in her room, and he would personally prepare a decoction and bring it to her. The maid immediately thanked the priest. The man said it wasn't a good idea and walked away. At first, Priest Guesswell seemed cold and stern to Casper, but once he got to know him, you'd find he was a genuinely good person. Casper asked the lady how the medicine tasted. The heroine replied that it was perfectly tolerable. Maybe it was just her imagination, but her headache really seemed to have gotten a little better. The maid was very happy to hear this. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and someone told the lady she had a visitor. Since he had come so suddenly, the heroine began to think it was her uncle, but it turned out to be Sir River Byron urgently requesting a meeting, much to her surprise. Era walked straight up to the man. River asked her what the Earl had said. The guy blushed as soon as he saw her. She gently touched his hair and said it was nothing important, telling him not to worry. Instead, she held out her hand and suggested they take a walk together. River's face turned even redder, but he didn't hesitate to take Era's hand. She guessed he had rushed over because he was worried about her conversation with the Earl. If she had really wanted to hide it from him, River would never have found out. Era stood before him and told him that since he had come to see her in person, everything was fine now. She just wanted to see him. Whenever the heroine made that face, River couldn't hide his fluster. But then he suddenly said that if nothing really happened, that was a good thing. Era admitted that she wasn't actually sure if she was doing the right thing. She could barely handle her own affairs, and now she was causing trouble for others. The heroine decided to ask Sir River if he had ever felt burdened or annoyed by her. But in fact, the thought had never crossed the guy's mind, even though the lady did put him in a difficult position sometimes. But even so, he enjoyed being with her. So he told her that if she needed help, she could always come to him. He was always ready to be used. Era smiled and said that it sounded like a love confession. River immediately apologized to the lady if his words had sounded that way. But the lady thought he shouldn't apologize because every woman would want a confession from Sir River. The dark-haired man suddenly asked, what about her? What would she do if it were a real confession? The heroine thought for a moment, then said that he couldn't actually confess to her, so the conversation was pointless. But she thanked him for saying it anyway. However, she had no intention of using him, as he suggested. Instead, perhaps the heroine would need his help again soon. She promised to tell him once she decided. River said with a warm smile that he would look forward to it. The heroine knocked on the Countess of Chesterfield's door and asked if she was available. Lily told Mrs. Goldwyn to come in. Era asked if the Countess had thought about what they had discussed last time. The lady had decided to take the lady's advice and divorce her husband. The battle in court would be tough, but after it was over, she could finally find peace. The heroine suggested the Countess tell her what was happening at the manor. She even showed her a portrait of a servant who had worked at the Chesterfield residence, but the Countess didn't recognize him at all. Era explained that this man had been working at the residence until recently and then suddenly quit. That being the case, the heroine thought they should bring him in for questioning. Since it had been a while since Lily left the residence, we must know what happened there. Better to be careful, right? Honestly, this should have been the Countess of Chesterfield's job, but she felt sorry for what had happened to the lady. The heroine said it was fine, and she would do her best to get as much information as possible. The Countess was very grateful to Era, and she even called her by her first name. The blonde smiled and said she was happy to help. Later at the casino, the guy cursed his terrible luck again. He was about to lose everything here. But the hero pleaded with him to wait, saying he would definitely win big next time and take home a huge prize. If he really wanted to, he could have beaten everyone here long ago. Just then, the knights burst into the casino. Everyone inside was terrified, thinking it was a raid. One of the knights pointed to their main target, the reason they were here. This was the man mentioned in the documents the lady had submitted. The guy immediately fell to his knees, begging the knights to forgive him and let him go this one time, saying he had only been coming for a month. But suddenly, one of the knights politely asked him to stand up. The red-haired man was stunned when he heard that Mrs. Goldwyn wanted to see him. The heroine praised the knights for a job well done. One of them replied that thanks to the lady, he was even able to get out, which was nice, although the job itself could have been more interesting. Era asked me to tell Sir River that she was grateful, as they had wasted Byron's night's time. The rest could go back, but she wanted to keep one person, just in case. Then the heroine turned to the man and told him it was a pleasure to finally meet him. He asked why he had been summoned, and Era told him not to worry, she wasn't going to hurt him. She suggested he sit down, as he must be tired from the journey. A few minutes later, the man confirmed that he had worked at the Chesterfield Manor for several months. The only thing the heroine cared about was why he had left the manor. The man replied that you don't need a reason to quit. He just decided to go back to his hometown. But the heroine knew the truth. He had actually stayed in the capital and started getting involved in underground gambling. There were rumors that the Earl of Chesterfield had given him a rather generous severance package, which meant something big must have happened to the residents. But the man didn't dare say anything because he was afraid the lady had come to see him on the Earl's orders. The heroine guessed that something had happened to the residents, and the Earl of Chesterfield had paid him to keep quiet. Era told him not to be nervous, as she was not on the Earl's side, because she was here on behalf of his wife, the Countess of Chesterfield. The man was stunned when he heard this. The heroine bluntly admitted that she wanted to help the Countess and gather some dirt on the Earl. She asked the former servant if he had any more doubts. If Mrs. Goldwyn was really here for the Countess, he was ready to tell her everything. He was ready to start from when the mistress was still living at the residence. The heroine told him that the more details he provided, the better. The former servant said that when he first started working at the residence, the Earl and his wife had just gotten married. Nothing special had happened before then, but ever since the Earl brought his mistress into the house, everything changed. Every time Vera showed up, he would greet her with ecstasy, and the mistress was always late because she wanted to dress up nicely for her beloved. They didn't even hide their affair from the Countess. It was as if the mistress of the house didn't exist at all. Despite this, there were still some people who genuinely sympathized with her. Whenever the servants gossiped, Vera would notice and sternly order them to go back to work and stop gossiping. Eventually, the mistress could no longer bear it and left the residence. The Earl and his mistress were glad that everything had finally settled down. However, some of the servants didn't think so. They were not ready to accept the Earl's mistress as their new lady, let alone obey her, because the real mistress was the one they had once served. The next morning, the Earl summoned all the servants. He furiously announced that after last night's dinner, someone had dared to speak ill of Vera. The Earl pointed directly at the storyteller's friend. He began to rack his brain, trying to come up with a punishment that would make the servant regret it for the rest of his life. These words scared the worker to death. The Earl and the woman acted as if they were the masters here, as if the mistress of the house didn't exist at all. Then, one by one, the servants loyal to the mistress disappeared. But the person telling this story, he had held on. After that chaos, he basically lived like a ghost, trying not to be noticed, and only left the residence later. It all stemmed from one incident. The man knocked on the Earl's office door, and when no one answered, he was thrilled, thinking he could sneak a search and leave quickly. He began to rummage through the papers on the desk. Suddenly, a piece of paper slipped to the floor. When he picked it up, he recognized it immediately, the income report from the charity dinner, which was supposed to be kept separately. This angered the man, as he realized the Earl had illegally embezzled the money. But suddenly, the master of the Chesterfield house returned to the office and caught the servant. The storyteller said he was just organizing the papers and tried to flee, but was stopped. The Earl knew immediately what he had seen. Our protagonist froze, his heart pounding with fear. It was too obvious to miss. The servant started making excuses, saying he didn't understand anything, but the Earl wasn't listening at all. He fired him on the spot and then threatened him, saying that if he left the house quietly, he could at least keep his pathetic life. Ira guessed that the man took the severance pay, left the residence, and then started gambling in underground casinos. If only they could have conclusive evidence against the Earl of Chesterfield. The heroine wondered if any of the remaining servants still supported the Countess. The Chesterfield couple's divorce hearing was held quietly in late June after the social season ended. Court documents confirmed that the Earl had hosted lavish parties while pocketing donations. The patriarch of the Chesterfield family couldn't figure out how the truth had been leaked. A faint smile crossed the Countess's lips. She had met someone earlier. Pulling down her hood, Lily asked the girl if she had found what she was looking for. The maid nodded and handed the documents to her mistress. The Countess of Chesterfield promised to reward her handsomely once she returned to the residence. But the girl replied that she didn't need any reward and only wished for her mistress to return quickly. The Earl gritted his teeth in anger, almost breathing fire. He couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out that he wasn't the only one to blame, that the woman had been deceiving him all along. The judge turned to the Countess and asked if this was true. Lily answered honestly that it was. After her parents, the former Earl and Countess of Chesterfield, passed away, her husband practically moved his mistress into the house. Even while he was playing the part of a doting husband, he was fooling around with another woman. Admittedly, Lily had an affair during the marriage, but by then their marriage was already over in all but name. She was simply seeking some comfort. But this divorce was not due to her infidelity, but because of the crimes committed by the Earl of Chesterfield. The judge listened intently to the Countess's statement and then announced the verdict. Countess Lily Chesterfield has admitted to her infidelity, but is also certain that the Earl of Chesterfield himself had an affair during the marriage, and his mistress now resides at the estate. Furthermore, in the Countess's case, her actions took place after their relationship had broken down. Meanwhile, the Earl of Chesterfield has tarnished the family honor and severely damaged the family fortune. Therefore, the court rules to dissolve the marriage between the Earl and Countess of Chesterfield, with all property to be returned to the Countess. Furthermore, the title of Earl is revoked and returned to the Countess of Chesterfield. This court is now adjourned. Lily was immensely grateful to Miss Godwin, for without her, she would not have been able to find the evidence. Now that the social season was over, the heroine had to return to her estate. The Countess of Chesterfield stated that if Miss Godwin ever needed help in the future, she could always come to her. Finally, everything was settled. Now, it was the heroine's turn to reclaim her rightful place. The next day, Miss Godwin returned to her family estate, but she knew no one was waiting for her. For a moment, she wondered how Joseph was doing. The heroine knew very well that to get what she wanted, she had to weaken her uncle's influence in the Godwin household. The first step was to find him as soon as possible. Soon, the Godwin family gathered for dinner. Miss Godwin could sense that the disgruntled Baroness Marcella had something to say to her. Without waiting for the other to speak, she stood up and announced that she was not feeling well and was returning to her room. Marcella was furious, but the Baron suggested they finish their meal first. They had told him his niece had fainted in Montglas, but that wasn't the case, so the man decided to talk to Ingalls about it. Just then, River finally arrived at the Byron territory in the north. The people were thrilled to see their lord. They rushed over, and River immediately apologized for arriving so late, but they just smiled and said the compensation money had allowed them to completely rebuild the village. A child ran up to River and said excitedly that he wanted to become a noble knight like him, because he also wanted to help people in the same way. After all, thanks to Lord River, my mom was able to get treatment. She was injured by a monster, and we didn't have the money for emergency care, but now we can save her. The adults all said it was all thanks to Sir River. The man patted the child's head, said it was a worthy goal to pursue, and promised he would surely become a great knight. But River had to keep moving, so he bid farewell to his people. In truth, he felt pathetic for taking credit for what Miss Godwin had done. She was the one everyone should be thanking. The heroine secretly followed the servants. The short-haired maid shoved the poor girl and then started yelling at her. Old servants who had worked there their whole lives now had to obey the newcomers. To change the situation, the heroine had to start small, just as her uncle had done. Ella returned to her room, not expecting to find Caspar inside. She asked if the lady had finished with her business. If the mistress needs help, I'm always ready to serve. The heroine nodded and asked the girl for a favor. Caspar immediately sprang into action, eager to carry out her mistress's orders. She soon returned with news. The servants were clearly divided into two factions, with one being hostile to the other. Ella wondered how this affected their work. Caspar went to check the kitchen, where only a few people were working. But one person stood out, the one Miss Godwin had mentioned who was bossing the others around. No matter how important that person was to her uncle, he wouldn't have given her that much power. The heroine knew that well. Ella requested a meeting with her uncle and only received a response 3 days later. Edith got straight to the point and asked his niece what she wanted to talk about. The heroine explained that there were some problems among the servants. Some had started bossing others around while slacking off on their own work. Ella lied, saying the maids had come to her because the situation had gotten seriously out of hand. Baron Edith promised he would talk to them, but the heroine insisted, saying those servants needed to be replaced as soon as possible. Her uncle began to explain that replacing servants wasn't that simple, as everyone had to be paid severance at the same time. She replied that if the staff started to undermine discipline, It would lead to a full-scale rebellion from the top down. Her uncle took a deep breath and asked for a list of the servants so he could keep an eye on them and take action. As soon as Edith left, the heroine breathed a sigh of relief. Now all she had to do was go see Joseph. As soon as they arrived, Frederick, like a true gentleman, helped Miss Godwin out of the carriage. The heroine immediately spotted Joseph, who was snatching a small pouch from some fellow. She was about to rush over, completely ignoring Frederick's nervous words telling her to calm down. But the girl charged right between them and asked what on earth was going on. The man pointed at Joseph and said this guy had stolen something and was now denying it. The moment the former butler saw Miss Godwin, he dropped the money pouch and bolted. The heroine chased after Joseph and quickly caught him. She wondered if he had been deliberately avoiding her. Ella asked him for a few minutes, and Joseph finally agreed, knowing this was bound to happen sooner or later. River received an invitation from the Royal Guard for a tactical meeting on monster control. If he accepted, he could travel to the capital and perhaps even see Miss Godwin. Joseph led the lady and her companion into a building, apologizing that there weren't many places nearby where they could talk privately. Ella replied that if it was just for a conversation, anywhere would do. The heroine sat down at the table and thanked Joseph for his time. First, she wanted to know how he had ended up in a place like this. Ella promised Joseph that she would help him return to the Godwin estate as a butler. But the man bluntly said he would not go back. Joseph wished for the lady to stop worrying about him. He asked her to leave him alone, then stood up from the table and walked out of the cottage. Frederick wondered if she really wanted to bring that guy back to the estate, as it would be much faster to find someone new. But only Joseph truly understood the heroine and could help her, which is why she desperately needed him. River arrived at Montclair's, where the housekeeper was waiting to greet him. Ellie quickly guessed the man was here for a reason, so she told him bluntly that Miss Godwin had already returned to her estate. You could see the look of disappointment flash across the Lord's face. Not wanting him to leave just like that, the housekeeper invited him for tea, intending to ask about the golden light. River asked if it was really that important. It turned out they often regarded the golden light as a divine blessing. If the light appeared when they touched, perhaps the gods had chosen them, and that was why the lady woke up. River said the Earl of Byron didn't believe in gods, and to be honest, influenced by him, he wasn't very religious either. Nevertheless, the man wondered if the blessing only appeared when they touched. Ellie said it usually depended on the situation, but yes, most of the time it was like that. River couldn't help but wonder if the lady knew about this blessing and was doing it on purpose. But he couldn't just walk up and ask her, you know. The next day, the heroine went to the main temple. Her head was still throbbing with pain, but she pushed through it, trying to stay strong. Ella had her head down when she suddenly noticed a person standing on the steps above her. She was surprised when she realized it was Sir River. The heroine confessed that she didn't know he had left the capital. River told Miss Godwin that he hadn't expected to see her here either. The girl asked what he was doing at the temple, and he said he wanted to figure something out. He decided to also ask the lady what she was doing here. Ella said she was here to visit her father, as he was receiving treatment under the care of the priests. An awkward silence hung between them. River closed his eyes and told the lady he had to go, but she suddenly grabbed his hand, anxiously begging him to wait. The moment she did, her headache began to subside. She let go of his hand, apologizing that she was just so happy to see him. She had touched him first again. River never thought he'd start noticing things like this. He told her he was happy to see her too. Then he walked away without another word. The heroine entered the room where her father was lying. She sat down in a chair and immediately apologized for not visiting him recently. High Priest Amadia entered the room, and upon seeing the lady inside, smiled and said it had been a long time. The heroine smiled and greeted him. The high priest offered to bring the lady some tea, but she politely declined. She decided to ask about her father's condition. Amadia said in a sad tone that he still showed no signs of waking up. He promised to pay more attention, but Ella replied that he was already doing more than enough. Unexpectedly, the high priest asked about the lady's physical condition. She rarely came to the temple, so Amadia was starting to worry that she was too busy to take care of herself. Should I hide these headaches and insomnia from the high priest? Back then, my uncle had asked loudly if I was unwell, perhaps because of everything that had happened, so Edith promised to have a doctor prescribe some medicine for me. I sincerely thanked my uncle at the time, but then he suddenly told me not to tell anyone but him about my illness. He said, You can't show weakness to anyone. He wasn't wrong, and I actually agreed with that. But the problem was something else entirely. My uncle definitely had an ulterior motive. He was poisoning me through Ingalls and told me to keep quiet so I wouldn't get medicine from anyone else. How am I only realizing this now? The priest noticed the lady didn't look right, and she explained that she hadn't been sleeping well lately and sometimes had headaches. Amadia asked with concern how long this had been going on. Ella said it had been a while, but it had gotten better recently, though it was starting to act up again now. But it's fine. It's not a serious illness. The high priest needs to focus on my father, so Ella didn't want to bother him with such a small matter. Amadia promised to prepare a blessing prayer for the lady, for which she thanked him. Then the high priest left the room. Alone, Ella told her father about her plan to bring Joseph back to the estate. Her uncle had replaced a large number of staff during this time, and that wasn't even half of the problems that needed correcting. But if she took her time, by the time her father woke up, everything would be back to normal. So the heroine decided to make this promise. The Baron was furious. He had invested so much money in that good-for-nothing, and now he was saying he couldn't stay any longer. We have to keep the rumors about Ella circulating. The problem isn't that she's an illegitimate child, but that the prophecy was misinterpreted. The Baron's men began to spread rumors of the engagement being called off, but they kept a low profile so the rumors wouldn't die out. Edith told his men to find out who had been talking to the head of the Lumiere Chamber of Commerce recently. It was now pointless for the Baron to try using the same poison that had already failed to kill his niece. Edith demanded that Ingalls be brought before him, as he had a job for him. The next day, the healer appeared in the Baron's office. Edith asked how things were progressing, and Ingalls said everything was as usual, so he could prepare some new medicine for Ella. This made the doctor raise an eyebrow. Since the old poison didn't work, maybe she found an antidote, so we have to go back to the old ways. The Baron reminded him that his patience was not infinite. That's why he ordered the poison dosage to be doubled. Ingalls agitatedly tried to explain that it would be too obvious and they would surely leave a trace. The Baron agreed, but didn't care, as no evidence could link them. If the doctor didn't want to do it, he could just say so, and Edith would find someone else. The doctor bowed and assured the Baron he would carry out any order. A few days later, Ingalls came to the Godwin estate again. The head maid, Merlin, greeted him immediately. The man opened his briefcase, found the medicine for the week, and handed it to her. Then he gave her a small vial and asked her to make sure the lady took it on time. Merlin handed Ingalls the lady's blood sample for the week and asked if he shouldn't know how she was feeling. The apothecary admitted he was worried that her condition hadn't changed. The head maid was sure the lady would recover soon, since the medicine was prepared by Ingalls. The man nodded and asked her to take good care of the lady before leaving. In the end, he couldn't bring himself to increase the dosage of the poison. Ingalls was lucky that it was an unsuspecting maid who took the medicine and not the Baron, who would have surely questioned the dosage on the spot. River tore open the letter he had received. In it, Ella apologized for their last encounter and asked to meet, saying she would be honest with him. River could have just left and headed straight north, but rather than let things get unpleasant, he felt he should face her, even if it stung. So the man sent a reply, and they met soon after. Sir River invited the noble lady to his residence. The heroine smiled warmly and thanked him for the invitation. The man asked the lady to let him escort her to a quiet place. The two sat opposite each other, and Ella once again apologized for what happened at the temple. River was completely caught off guard by this. The heroine asked in a fluster if he was surprised when she suddenly grabbed his hand. Ella felt he looked displeased at the time, but River said it wasn't like that. The lady hadn't displeased him. He was just dealing with some personal matters. Ella felt it had been a long time since they had talked like this. Now that the social season was over, River had to return to the north. She said dejectedly that it had been a long time since she had sat down and talked with someone alone. River mentioned that he had visited Montglas a while ago. The heroine learned that the Countess of Chesterfield was still there. As long as Priest Guswell was there, Lily had no reason to leave. Ella made a mental note to visit the Countess another day as well. River realized that talking about Montglas had actually put Miss Godwin in a better mood. She had looked pale the last time he saw her, so he had started to worry. The heroine was surprised when River suddenly stood up, and then he sat down right next to her. River suddenly asked the lady if she could hold his hand. The heroine did not expect such a request. River explained that her expression became calmer when she held his hand, and he wanted her to feel at peace all the time, even if it meant taking advantage of her in the process. Dejectedly, Ella reminded River that when they first met in the Twin Valleys, she had mentioned she had insomnia. At the time, River thought she was just making up some strange excuse, but she confessed that headaches and insomnia had plagued her for over a year, and nothing had helped. She could only fall asleep after drinking a lot of alcohol and sharing a bed with a man. However, after meeting River, a miracle happened. The pain that had been tormenting her just disappeared. That's why she started seeking him out, but now Ella fully understood that it was too much to do. She should have told him about this sooner, so she apologized again for being a jerk. River replied that it was fine, as he probably wouldn't have believed her back then anyway. In any case, he still found it hard to believe, to be honest. River told the lady with confidence that if she needed him, she could contact him anytime. He would postpone his return to the north. He would just tell everyone else that he had decided to stay in the capital a little longer. The heroine gave a bright smile and thanked River. The man was running for his life, trying to get away from his pursuers, but he tripped on a stone and fell hard on the pavement, scraping both his hands. The man scrambled backward in terror, realizing his pursuers were about to make their move. Bright red blood splattered on the walls of the dim alley. The pursuer didn't understand why he ran when he knew he'd be caught in the end. Anyway, Frederick pulled down his hood, annoyed, saying this was really getting on his nerves. The Duke peeked around the corner and found the man he was looking for. Joseph was injured and unconscious. Frederick took a deep breath and lifted the former butler. Alas, what wouldn't he do for the lady? He carried Joseph back to the house and laid him on the bed. Then he cleaned and bandaged the wounds, wondering why anyone would attack him. The guy didn't look like a common thug, which meant someone probably held a grudge against Joseph. The next day, Miss Godwin paid Frederick a visit. He studied her face intently, while she looked at him in confusion. After a few seconds, Frederick concluded that the lady was clearly getting better. He guessed something good must have happened. The Duke was even a little jealous, feeling like he was aging by the day because of the lady. Ella didn't understand what he meant, and Frederick added that it was just a joke. But the man revealed that something did happen a few days ago. Although the heroine couldn't immediately tell if he was joking, she knew she had put the Duke through a lot, so she promised to repay him for everything, no matter what. Frederick said he would hold her to that. He was sure the lady was here for news about Joseph. He had been seriously injured recently, but Frederick had given him first aid and called a doctor, so he should be fine. Ella couldn't understand how the Duke could be so casual about it, but Frederick replied that he was always thinking of the lady and was concerned for Joseph's safety. The heroine said she wanted to see him, and the Duke suggested going tomorrow, but she refused, saying she wanted to see him now. So they went, but Joseph just told them to get lost again. The former butler kept repeating that he would never return to the estate. The heroine asked if he would really do that, even if the Godwin estate fell into his uncle's hands. Ella didn't know why he had left and was hiding in a place like this, but the heroine wasn't just asking him to come back. She needed Joseph's help, because she was planning to take back the Godwin estate. The former butler definitely didn't expect her to drop that bombshell. Just before he passed out, the Duke had delivered a message. The man reached for a drawer and immediately pulled it open. It turned out that Duke Godwin knew someone was after him, and he suspected that Baron Anton might be behind the whole thing. So he had left some documents with Joseph. The former butler had kept them safe all this time, and now he handed them to the lady. The heroine asked, "Why are you only telling me this now?" The truth is, Joseph had no idea how serious she was, thinking she just needed a shoulder to lean on. He had always seen her as a cheerful and bright girl, so he assumed she could handle everything on her own. Frederick, with a displeased look, asked Joseph if he had seriously underestimated Era. That guy explained that the documents contained intelligence on the Duke's secret funds and where the money came from. But most importantly, they had dirt on Baron Anton's weaknesses. If Joseph had handed over those documents sooner, Miss Goldwyn wouldn't have had to go through so much trouble. But if this had happened when Era was still completely in the dark, they would have taken everything from her. Frederick told the young lady he would wait for her outside. Joseph bluntly asked the girl what her relationship with Duke Lindman was, as it seemed he was there to help her. But our heroine couldn't just blurt out that she had met him in Twinvale, so Era told Joseph that they had met by chance at some high society party and that he had been helping her ever since. The former butler mentioned that he had seen the Duke a few times, but this was the first time they had spoken. Since the Duke was back in the capital, he must have resolved the desertification issue in the West. The heroine recalled that the Lindman family's territory was in the West, and the Duke had been dealing with the desert problem a year ago. Era had been so busy with her own mess that she had completely forgotten about it. The young lady said she had to go and told Joseph to return to the estate as soon as things calmed down. That guy just smiled and said he would. Moreover, Era planned to talk to the Duke so that Joseph wouldn't have to stay in such a godforsaken place any longer. As soon as the young lady stepped outside, Frederick asked if everything went well, and she replied, yes. The Duke held the carriage door open for her, and she told him they were going to the Goldwyn estate. Frederick helped the girl into the carriage. The heroine decided to look at the documents Joseph had given her, so she took everything out. But just then, a small note fell onto her lap, immediately catching her attention. She picked it up and read what was inside. Whatever was written on it made her freeze. The content went something like this. If Era was reading this letter, it meant the situation had become very dire. If someone was threatening her, she could go to Montagres and find a priest named Ellie. But even though our heroine was in Montagres at the time, she never tried to talk to her. Since the note was handwritten by her father, the information had to be true. So it seemed our heroine would have to make a trip to Montagres soon. Era hurried back to the Goldwyn estate as quickly as she could. Marcella immediately came up to her, very angry, and asked where on earth she had been and why she was only showing up now. Casper greeted the young lady, and our heroine told the Baroness that she had gone to an important meeting. Without breaking her stride, Era headed straight for her room. Marcella ordered her to stop and show her what was in her hands. But the heroine just brushed her off dismissively, saying it was nothing important and not to worry, Baroness. She hadn't expected the insolent little brat to be so audacious. The words were harsh, but the woman could do nothing about Era and had to swallow her anger. The Baron asked his wife what was wrong. Marcella asked her husband in despair how much longer he was going to tolerate his niece's nonsense. She was getting bolder by the day. That brazen girl had attended a few social events and now thought she was all that. Edith began to soothe his wife, saying they just needed to wait a little longer because Era would soon have to face reality. The heroine returned to her room. She told Casper that she was holding something very important. The maid was surprised because her lady had just said it was nothing important. The heroine told Casper not to worry too much. Era decided to go over all the documents again. She had an important request for the maid, one that might be a bit tricky. The heroine wanted her to keep an eye on Giles for a while if they wanted Joseph to return to the estate. The butler's position needed to be vacated. Casper asked what if the butler was innocent, but the heroine seriously doubted he was who everyone thought he was. Goodness, the estate was dead silent at night. This meant Casper had to be careful and stay quiet. But she suddenly noticed another person sneaking around in the hallway. It was so late that the head maid jumped when Casper called out to her. Casper, very nervous, asked if everything was all right, and Merlin said she was fine, just had a coughing fit. The woman asked what Casper was doing out at this hour. Our girl said, a bit awkwardly, that she couldn't sleep and wanted to go for a walk. However, it wasn't safe to walk around the estate at night, so Casper needed to return to her room. She nodded, and Merlin went about her business. It was all very strange, and the maid even began to wonder if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But there was definitely blood on the woman's scarf. The heroine was in her room, carefully studying all the documents. She discovered that Zales's father had once worked for the Goldwyn family, but after a certain incident, they had cut all ties with him. Era wondered if her uncle knew about this. They could only hope that Casper would be able to dig up something. The heroine decided to call it a night, as she was meeting Sir River tomorrow. The next day, the girl told the man everything she had learned from the documents Joseph gave her. River reminded the young lady that she had forgotten something. He held out his hand, hinting for her to touch him. The heroine immediately did as he asked and felt an instant sense of relief. She confessed to River, a little embarrassed, that holding hands like that made her feel awkward. So that guy suggested they think of a different way for next time. The heroine smiled and asked if he had made all the desserts himself, and River nodded. He hadn't realized the young lady wouldn't like them, so he had just prepared everything he could. The girl told him with a warm smile that she loved them, but she only took a sip of her tea, and that guy guessed that she wasn't a big fan of sweets. River remembered there was something he wanted to ask the young lady. He was curious about Era's relationship with Duke Frederick Linman. The heroine explained that he was just helping her with some things she couldn't handle on her own. River asked in a sad tone if he couldn't provide the help she needed. It turned out he had been nervous about her seeing the Duke. The heroine, of course, understood why Sir River was so nervous, but when it came to intelligence networks, the Duke and Sir River were on completely different levels. River apologized, saying he knew he shouldn't have brought it up at all. Knowing the young lady was in a difficult situation, he shouldn't have let his feelings cloud his judgment. The heroine promised Sir River that once everything settled down and she could finally catch her breath, they could talk about what was really going on between them. River just nodded in agreement with her words. The heroine looked up from her book when Casper let out another heavy sigh. So Era decided to ask her what was wrong. The maid asked the young lady if she thought the head maid was doing okay. The heroine replied that Merlin always said she was fine. Casper said she had snuck out of her room last night to check on the butler and had run into Merlin in the hallway. Era was surprised she would go out at night, but the girl replied that it was the best time to move around without being seen. Anyway, the head maid was coughing into a handkerchief. Casper could swear she saw drops of blood on it. Merlin looked to be in bad shape, so the girl was starting to worry about her health. The heroine promised she would talk to her later. Casper hadn't noticed anything else strange, but the girl promised to speak up immediately if she found anything unusual. The heroine told Casper that if she got into trouble, she should say that she had asked her to do it. The heroine thought to herself that she should be glad she wasn't feeling the pressure. A few days later, Casper burst into the young lady's room, glad that she was already awake. The maid whispered to the young lady that this information had to be kept secret. The heroine gestured for the other maids to leave the room. A moment like this could only mean one thing. Casper had dug up some dirt. Yesterday, the maid had slipped out to the garden and made her way to the butler's room. Although she wasn't entirely sure where his room was, she had a general idea of the direction, so she stopped when she was pretty sure she had found her target. The light in the room was still on, so Casper was surprised the butler was still awake at this hour. The window was suddenly thrown open, and a scream came from inside. Then a man jumped out onto the street, muttering that he was really pissed off, which meant someone was in Zyles's room, and it didn't look like he was there for a friendly visit. The heroine took a deep breath, praised Casper, and told her to stay indoors at night from now on. Era wondered how she was going to catch that guy. She needed someone in the estate, someone willing to help who was strong enough to subdue a grown man. The heroine wondered if she should invite Sir River to the estate, but she quickly dismissed the thought, as her uncle would never allow it. So Era considered asking someone else for help. A few nights later, the entire estate was in an uproar because they had found an intruder inside. All the shouting and commotion woke up the Baron. He came downstairs and asked what all the noise was about. The maids told him that some scoundrel had broken into the estate, and they said he might be a professional killer. Fortunately, the stableman had found him and subdued him. Now Edith had to see for himself the fool who dared to sneak into his estate. The maids led their master to the right place. The heroine angrily questioned how he dared to break into the Goldwyn estate, and that he would pay for his audacity. The Baron, with a strange smile, told Era to go back to her room, but she refused. This was Goldwyn family land, so as a member of the family, she needed to handle this. Besides, Era was the only one who could question this guy objectively, as he often visited the estate on Zyles's orders. The next day, the Baron was furious and demanded to know what was going on. Zyles admitted that he had personally brought the assassin into the estate. Marcella was clearly angry and asked what reason he had for such a disgusting act. The butler had his reasons, but he never intended to harm anyone living in the estate. But no matter the reason, you can't just let an outsider into the estate without permission. The Baron waved his hand, saying the important thing was that nothing happened. But Marcella was on edge just thinking about a professional killer breaking into their home. Anyway, there were plenty of people who wanted to be the Goldwyn family's butler, so Lionel suggested they just fire Zyles. The heroine didn't even need to get involved, but she still didn't understand why Zyles had hired a killer in the first place. So she decided to investigate further after Joseph returned to the estate. To make a long story short, Zyles was fired from his position as butler because the uncle couldn't get over his anxiety. So he fired him without a second thought. But now they had to find a new butler as soon as possible. The household needed someone to manage the estate. Lionel suddenly chimed in that things would be much better if Annie wasn't in such bad shape. The Baron cut his son off, and that's when the kid finally got the hint. That guy gave the heroine a very angry look. Era wondered if it was because she had directly mentioned her uncle's man, but that wasn't it. It was because Lionel had messed up. The heroine thought to herself, does Baron Anton have a sister I don't know about? Era told her uncle that he didn't have to bother looking for a new butler because there was someone who used to work here. Edith guessed she was talking about Johann. That guy explained to his niece that he had already written to him, but Johann hadn't replied. The heroine asked her uncle in surprise if he knew where the former butler was now, but Edith replied that he was probably at his family's place. So the girl decided to tell him that she had received a letter from Johann a while ago, postmarked from the capital. The heroine had replied to him today, saying the estate needed a butler, and then offered him the position. The Baron was furious and asked why she hadn't consulted him first. The heroine gave her uncle a guilty look and said he was considering Joseph anyway, so what was the big deal? The girl added that she would let him know as soon as she received a reply. With a smile on her face, the heroine slipped out of the dining room. Because of the butler situation, the heroine was a little late, but she still made it to Montagres. The estate manager, Ellie, greeted her with a bright smile. The woman asked how the young lady had been, and the heroine said she was well, then asked Ellie the same. The manager chuckled and said that everything was the same as always. She added that Sir River was also visiting today. No sooner had she said that than the heroine saw a man standing right in front of her. Era gave an awkward nod, and River greeted her as well. The heroine clearly remembered that the atmosphere was a bit strange the last time they were together. River pointed out that, come to think of it, they had also met by chance last time. There must be some kind of connection between them. The heroine was very surprised that Sir River didn't seem to feel any of the awkwardness she did. They both wanted to talk to the manager of Montagres about something. Since Sir River had arrived first, Ellie suggested that he decide what to do next. The guy didn't mind talking in front of the young lady, but he wanted to know what Era herself thought about it. The heroine wondered if she should talk about her father in front of Sir River, but she then realized that she had no reason to hide anything from him. River was trustworthy. After she made up her mind, Ellie suggested they follow her. The manager poured them some tea and asked what brought them to her. The heroine explained that she had come after reading the document her father had left behind. Ellie immediately understood they were talking about Duke Goldwyn. Her father had written that the manager of Montagres was the only one who could help her. The woman said that it was Duke Goldwyn himself who had sent her to this place. Before her arrival, a priest named Abbot managed the place, and he was quite close to the Duke. But that man had recently passed away. So basically, Ellie came to Montagres to take over for this abbot. The heroine wondered if the orphanage was hiding some dark secret. Well, it sounded a bit dramatic coming from her, but she was actually on the right track. This place held a secret about the death of the Grand Prince.